servant Ajimbora had planted his knife in a standard-bearer's heart over a perceived insult to his master. In truth, a real insult, but Ajimbora should have held his temper the way he himself had. Since then, he had taken to leaving the wiry little hill tribesmen in the forest with the Sultan and Damani and some of the guards to watch over the pack horses when he entered a camp. He had come a long way from Ebudar chasing the wind, almost 4 weeks of herring after rumors, until the news brought him here to this camp in east-central Altara. A neat rows of pale tents and horse lines stood in a forest clearing large enough for Rakan to land, but there was no sign of Rakan or flyers, no ground company with its wagons and Rakan grooms. But then, he had not seen a Rakan in the skies for some time now. Supposedly, almost all had been sent west. Why, he did not know and did not care. The High Lady was his
Fire, how
goal
you
and his
doing?
entire world. A tall, thin message pole cast its long shadow in the early morning sun, though, so there must be Rakan somewhere about. He thought the camp might contain 1,000 men, not counting farriers and cooks and the like. Interestingly, every last soldier he could see wore familiar armor from home, rather than those solid breastplates and barred helmets. Practice was to pad out most forces with men from this side of the ocean. It was interesting that they were all armored, too.
Night hasn't been too
Commander
bad.
kept
Can't
his
complain
soldiers
too
in armor,
much.
unless he expected action soon. From the rumors he had picked up, that might be the case here. 3 flagstaffs marked the command tent, a tall walled affair of pale canvas with air vents along the peak that doubled as smoke holes. No smoke issued from them now, for the morning was only a little cool, though the sun hung not far above the horizon. On one flagstaff, the blue-bordered imperial banner hung in limp folds, hiding the spread-winged golden hawk clutching lightning in its talons. Some commanders hung it from a horizontal staff, so it was always visible in full, but he thought that ostentatious. The other 2 banners, on shorter flanking staffs, would be of the regiments these men belonged to. Kharid dismounted in front of that tent and removed his helmet. Captain Musenge emulated him, revealing a grim expression on his weathered face. The other men climbed down, too, to rest their horses, and stood by their animals. The Ogier gardeners leaned on their long-hafted, black-tasseled axes. Everyone knew they would not be staying long. "Keep the men out of trouble," he told Musenge. "If that means accepting insults, so be it." "There'd be fewer insults if we killed a few of them," Musenge muttered. He had been in the Death Watch Guards even longer than Kharid, though his hair was unbroken black, and he would suffer insults to the Empress, might she live forever, as gladly as insults to the guards. Arthur scratched one of his long gray mustaches with a finger the size of a fat sausage. The first gardener, commander of all the Ogier in the High Lady Tuan's bodyguard, was almost as tall as a man in the saddle, and wide with it. His red and green lacquered armor contained enough steel to make armor for 3 or 4 humans. His face was as dour as Musenge's, yet his booming voice was calm. Ogier were always calm, except in battle. Then they were as cold as deep winter in Jeranem. "After we rescue the High Lady, we can kill as many of them as need killing, Musenge." Recalled to his duty, Musenge flushed from having allowed himself to stray. "After," he agreed. Kharid had schooled himself too hard over the years, had been schooled too hard by his trainers to sigh, but had he been other than a Death Watch guard, he might have done so now. Not because Musenge wanted to kill someone, and almost anyone would do. Rather, it was because the insults he had walked away from these past weeks chafed him as much as they did Musenge and Hartha. But the guards did whatever was necessary to carry out their assignments, and if that meant walking away from men who spat on the ground at the sight of armor in red and the dark green most called black, or dared to murmur about lowered eyes in his hearing, then walk away he must. Finding and rescuing the High Lady Tuan was all that mattered. Everything else was dross beside that. Helmet under his arm, he ducked into the tent to find what must have been most of the camp's officers gathered around a large map spread out on a folding camp table. Half wore segmented breastplates lacquered in horizontal red and blue stripes, the other half red and yellow. They straightened and stared when he walked in. Men from Koyal or Dalanshar, with skin blacker than charcoal,
How's
Brown
your
men
night
from the
going,
coast,
Fire?
fair-haired men from Menchaca, pale-eyed men from El Camp, men from every part of the empire. Their stares held not the wariness often tinged with admiration that he had always been used to, but very nearly challenges. It seemed everyone believed the filthy tale of guards' involvement with a girl pretending to be the High Lady Tuhan and extorting gold and jewels from merchants. Likely they believed that other whispered tale about the girl, not merely vile, but horrific. No, that the High Lady was in danger of her life from the ever-victorious army itself went beyond horrific. That was a world gone mad. Farik Kari, he said coolly. His hand wanted to go to his sword hilt. Only discipline kept it at his side. Discipline and duty. He had accepted sword thrusts for duty. He could accept insults for it. I wish to speak to the commander of this camp. For a long moment, the silence stretched. Everybody out! A tall, lean man barked at last in the sharp accents of Dalanchar. The others saluted, gathered their helmets from another table, and filed out. Not one offered Karid a salute. His right hand twitched once, feeling a phantom hilt against his palm, and was still. Gamel Luna, the lean man introduced himself. Missing the top of his right ear, he had a slash of solid white there through his tight black curls and flecks of white elsewhere. What do you want? There was the barest touch of wariness in that. A hard man and self-controlled. He would have had to be to earn the 3 red plumes decorating the helmet atop his sword rack. Weak men without mastery of themselves did not rise to banner general. Karid suspected the only reason Luna was willing to talk to him was that his own helmet wore 3 black plumes. Not to interfere in your command. Luna had cause to fear that. Ranks in the Death Watch Guard stood half a step higher than those outside. He could have co-opted the man's command had he needed to, though he would have been required to explain his reasons later. They would have had to be good reasons for him to avoid losing his head. I understand there have been difficulties in this part of Altara recently. I want to know what I am riding into. Luna grunted. Difficulties? That's one word for it. A stocky man in a plain brown coat, a narrow beard dangling from the point of his chin, entered the tent, carrying a heavily carved wooden tray with a silver pitcher and 2 sturdy white cups, the sort that would not break easily while being carried about in wagons. The scent of freshly brewed coffee began to suffuse the air. Your coffee, Banner General. Setting the tray on the edge of the table holding the map, he carefully filled 1 cup with the black liquid, while watching Karid from the corner of his eye. Somewhere in his middle years, he wore a pair of long knives at his belt, and his hands had a knifeman's calluses. Karid sensed close kin to Ajimbura, in spirit but not in blood. Those dark brown eyes never came from the Kansada hills. I waited till the others left, since there's hardly enough for you anymore. Don't know when I'm going to get more, I don't. Will you take coffee, Karid? Luna's reluctance was obvious, but he could hardly fail to offer. For an insult that large, Karid would have been forced to kill him, or so the man would think. With pleasure, Karid replied. Placing his helmet alongside the tray, he doffed his steel-backed gauntlets and laid them beside it. The serving man filled the second cup, then started toward a corner of the tent. But Luna said, That will be all for now, Mentoile. The stocky man hesitated, eyeing Karid, before making a bow to Luna, touching eyes and lips with his fingertips and departing. Mentoile is overprotective of me, Luna explained. Clearly, he did not want to explain, but he did want to avoid what might be taken for open insult. Odd fellow, attached himself to me years ago in Pujili, wormed his way into becoming my manservant. I think he'd stay if I stopped paying him. Yes, very close kin to Ajimbura. For a time they simply sipped coffee, balancing the cups on fingertips and enjoying the pungent bitterness. It seemed to be a pure Ijaz Mountains brew, and if so, very expensive. Kareed's own supply of black beans, most definitely not Ijaz Mountains, had run out a week ago, and he had been surprised at how much he missed having coffee. He never used to mind going without anything at need. The first cups done, Luna refilled them. You were going to tell me about the difficulties? Kareed prompted, now that conversation would not be impolite. He always tried to be polite, even with men he was going to kill, and rudeness here would dam up the man's tongue. Luna set his cup down and leaned his fists on the table, frowning at the map. Small red wedges supporting tiny paper banners were scattered across it, marking Shanshan forces on the move, and red stars indicating forces holding in place. Little black discs marking engagements peppered the map, but strangely, no white discs to indicate the enemy. None. Over the last week, Luna said, there have been 4 sizable engagements and upwards of 60 ambushes, skirmishes, and raids. Many quite large, all spread out across 300 miles. That encompassed almost the entire map. His voice was stiff. Plainly given a choice, he would have told Kareed nothing. That half-step gave him none, however. There must be 6 or 8 different armies involved on the other side. The night after the first large engagement saw 9 major raids, each 40 to 50 miles from the site of the battle. Not small armies either, or at least not taken altogether, but we can't find them, and nobody has any eyeless idea where they came from. Whoever they are, they have the money, those Aes Sedai with them, and maybe those cursed Ashaman. Men have been torn apart by explosions our Damani say weren't caused by the power. Kareed sipped his coffee. The man was not thinking. If the enemy had Aes Sedai and Ashaman, they could use a thing called traveling to move as far as they wished in a step. But if they could do that, why had they not used it to step all the way to safety with their prize? Perhaps not all Aes Sedai and Ashaman could travel, yet that begged another question. Why had they not sent those who could? Maybe the only Aes Sedai were the Damani stolen from the Terrasan Palace. Reportedly, none of them had had any idea how to travel. That made sense. What do the prisoners say about who sent them? Luna's laugh was bitter. Before you can have eyeless prisoners, you need an eyeless victory. What we've had are a string of eyeless defeats. Picking up his cup, he took a sip. His voice loosened as if he had forgotten the colors of Kareed's armor. He was just a soldier talking his trade now. Gurat thought he had some of them 2 days ago. He lost 4 banners of horse and 5 afoot, almost to the last man. Not all dead, but most of the wounded are the next thing to it, pin-cushioned with crossbow bolts. Mostly Terabanners and Amadisians, but that isn't supposed to matter, is it? Had to be 20,000 or more crossbowmen to put out that volume. 30,000 maybe. And yet they managed to hide from the Marat Rakan. I know we've killed some. The reports claim it, at least. But they don't even leave their dead behind. Some fools have begun whispering that we're fighting spirits. Fools he might consider them, but the fingers of his left hand hooked inside the wall of evil. I'll tell you one thing I know, Kareed. Their commanders are very good. Very, very good.
As close as I got to
Every
dab
man to face them
I did
has
my
been
last
fought
dab
off his
earlier.
feet, outmaneuvered and outfought completely. Kareed nodded thoughtfully. He had speculated that the White Tower must have tasked one of its best to kidnap the High Lady Tuon, but he had not been thinking along the lines of what people this side of the ocean called the Great Captains. Perhaps Tom Maryland's real name was Agonar Jagad, or Gareth Bryn.
I
He
definitely
looked
do a lot of
forward to
damage.
meeting the man,
Make a lot
at
of
least
pink
to ask
cushions.
him how he had known she would be coming to Abu Dar. He might hide Suroth's involvement, but then again he might not. On the heights, today's ally could be tomorrow's sacrifice. Except for the gardeners, the Death Watch guards were Daco Vale to the Empress herself, might she live forever, if they lived on the heights. There must be some plan for finding them and pinning them. Are you in charge of it? No, praise be to the light, Luna said fervently. He took a long drink as though wishing it were brandy. General Chison is bringing his entire army back through the Melvidi Narrows. Apparently, the Terrace Palace decided this was important enough to risk thrusts out of Mirundi or Andor. Though from what I've heard, neither one is capable of striking at anyone at the moment. I just have to wait here until Chison arrives. We'll see a different result then, I think. More than half Chison's men will be veterans from home. Abruptly, Luna seemed to recall who he was talking to. His face turned to dark wood, a hard mask. It did not matter. Harid was convinced this was the work of Marilyn, or whatever his name was, and he knew why the man was doing what he was doing. Under different circumstances, he would have told Luna his reasoning, but the High Lady would not be safe until she was back in the Philippine Palace among those who knew her face. If the man failed to believe him on the key point, that she was the High Lady, he would have increased her danger for nothing. I thank you for the cough, he said, setting the cup down and taking up his helmet and gauntlets. The light see you say, Luna. We will meet in Shanda someday. The light see you say, Harid, Luna said after a moment, plainly surprised by the polite farewell. We will meet in Shanda someday. The man had sheer cough, and Harid had no quarrel with him. Why should he be surprised? Harid did not speak to Mesenge until they had ridden out of the camp, the Ogier gardeners striding along just ahead of the human guards. Arthur was walking on Harid's other side, his long axe propped on his shoulder, his head nearly level with theirs. We head northeast, he said, for the Melvidi Narrows. If he remembered the maps correctly, and he seldom forgot any map he had more than glimpsed, they could reach it in 4 days. The light shine on us that we arrived before the High Lady. If they did not, the pursuit would continue, all the way to Tarvalon if necessary. The thought of turning back without the High Lady never occurred to him. If he had to bring her out of Tarvalon, he would.
Chapter 35. The Importance of Dylan. They want safe conduct? Elaine said incredulously. To enter Camelin? Lightning flashed outside the windows, and thunder boomed. Outside, a deluge fell on Camelin, a hammering downpour. The sun must have been well above the horizon, but the stand lamps were lit against twilight darkness. The slender young man standing in front of her low-backed chair colored with embarrassment, yet he continued to look her in the eye. He was little more than a boy, really, his smooth cheeks likely shaved as much for form as because he needed a razor very often. Very properly, Hansel Renshaw, Arabella's grandson, wore neither sword nor armor, but the marks of breastplate straps remained on his green coat, imprinted by long wear. A large damp spot on his left shoulder showed where his cloak had leaked through. Odd, the things you noticed at times like this. I was instructed to ask for it, my lady, he said, his voice steady. Dylan, arms folded beneath her breasts, grunted sourly. She was not far from scowling. Mistress Harford, resplendent as always in her crimson tabard, with the white lion spotless on her formidable bosom, sniffed audibly. Hansel colored again. They were in Elaine's smaller sitting room, where a small fire on the marble hearth took away most of the morning's chill, and lamp oil scented the air with roses. She wished Birgitta was there. From the mild irritation flowing through the bonds, she was dealing with reports. Her annoyance was not great enough for it to be anything more urgent. The arrival of Luan and the others below the city 2 days ago with their 60,000 armsmen had occasioned more than a little excitement and impromptu celebrations in the streets by the citizens, once it became clear they were not going to occupy the camps abandoned when Jared Sarand left, taking with him men from houses that now sided with Elaine, though they could not know it yet. The light only knew what trouble that bloody man was going to cause. But Hansel's message put a new complexion on the huge encampment just a mile south of Low Camelin. If Aracella, Luan, and the others knew about the city being supplied from Tyr and Ilion through gateways, and surely everyone in Andor knew by this time, perhaps they had decided a siege would accomplish nothing. Safe conduct was a matter of battle lines. Perhaps they intended to call for Camelin's surrender to avoid a grand assault. The proclamations of support, carried by kinswomen rather than riders, had been posted from Arengil to the mining villages in the Mountains of Mist, or soon would be. But even with Sumiko and other kinswomen wearing themselves out in healing, the armsmen of Karen, Anshar, and Baran, who had not been carried off by Jared, did not bring her numbers anywhere near 60,000. Small bands of armsmen were beginning to flow into the city as word spread that it was safe to approach Camelin, but not enough yet. It might be a week or more before sizable parties appeared. Those had been staying clear of the city for fear of Aramilla's army. The outcome of a massive assault was not a foregone conclusion. Men atop a wall had considerable advantage over those trying to scale it, but it would be a near-run thing at best, and no hope for more help soon. Dylan had paid another visit to Danine Kendread in the west, but the woman still dithered. Elaine had 9 houses where she needed 10. Everything hung in the balance, and Danine could not bloody decide whether or not to stand for Trakand. Why do they wish to speak with me? She managed to keep Birgitta's irritation from tinging her voice. Birgitta's and her own. Hansel reddened yet again. He seemed to do that easily. Burn her, they truly had sent a boy. I was not informed, my lady. I was simply told to ask for safe conduct. He hesitated. They will not enter Camelin without it, my lady. Rising, she went to her writing desk, removed a smooth sheet of good white paper from the rosewood paper box, and dipped a pen in the silver-mounted crystal ink jar. Precise letters flowed onto the page without her usual flourishes. She was short and to the point. Lord Luan Norwellen, Lady Aracella Renshar, Lord Televar Coelan, Lady Aemlyn Carand, Lady Elorian Tremaine, and Lord Abella Pendar may feel safe in entering Camelin and be assured that they and their retinues may depart the city at any time they wish. I will receive them informally this afternoon in the Grand Hall as befits their stations. We must speak of the Borderlanders. Elaine Trakand, daughter heir of Andor, high seat of House Trakand. She tried to maintain calm, but the steel nib dug into the paper with the last letters. Safe conduct. She channeled the ceiling candle alight, and her hand trembled as she dribbled golden yellow wax onto the page. They implied she would try to hold them by force. No, more than implied. They as good as said it. She pressed her seal, a blossoming lily, into the wax as if trying to drive it through the tabletop. Here, she said, handing the sheet to the young man. Her voice was ice, and she made no effort to warm it. If this fails to make them feel safe, perhaps they might try wrapping themselves in swaddling. Thunder boomed for punctuation. He colored once more, this time plainly in anger, but wisely confined himself to offering thanks as he folded the page. He was carefully tucking it inside his coat when Mistress Harford showed him out. She would escort him to his horse personally. A messenger from nobles as powerful as Luan and the others had to be given a certain level of honor. Suddenly Elaine's anger turned to sadness. She could not have said what she was sad over. Her moods often seemed to change without cause, perhaps for all those who had died and all those who would. Are you certain you don't want to be queen, Dylan? Luan and that lot would stand for you in a heartbeat, and if I stand for you, those who've stood for me will stand with me. Burn me, Danine would probably stand for you. Dylan took a chair, spreading her blue skirts carefully before answering. I'm absolutely certain. Running my own house is work enough for me without adding all of Andor to it. Besides, I disapprove of the throne changing houses without good cause. The lack of a daughter heir, or worse, one who's a fool or incompetent, cruel or greedy. You're none of those things. Continuity provides stability. and stability brings prosperity. She nodded. She liked that turn of phrase. Mind, had you died before returning to Camelin and making your claim, I would have entered my own. But the simple truth is, you'll make a better ruler than I would. Better for Andor. In part, that's because of your connection to the Dragon Reborn. Dylan's raised eyebrow invited Elaine to expound on that connection. But in large part, she went on when Elaine said nothing, it's you yourself. I watched you grow up. By the time you were 15, I knew you'd be a good queen. Perhaps as good as Andor has ever had. Elaine's face grew hot, and tears welled in her eyes. Burn her bouncing moods! Only she knew she could not blame her pregnancy this time. Praise from Dylan was like praise from her mother, never grudging, but never given unless she felt it was deserved. Her morning was busy, and she had only Camelin and the palace to deal with rather than all of Andor. Mistress Harfor reported that the spies in the palace who could be confirmed as reporting to Aranella or her allies had grown very quiet and still, like mice that feared a cat might be watching. At least it's safe to dismiss them now, my lady, Rena said in tones of great satisfaction. She disliked having spies in the royal palace as much as Elaine did, perhaps more. Daughter heir or queen might live in the palace, but in the first maid's eyes, it belonged to her. All of them. Spies for others had been left in place so that no one would suspect that Rena knew. Keep them all on and continue to watch them, Elaine told her. They're the most likely to take coin from someone else, and we know who they are. A spy who was known could be kept from learning anything they should not, and you could make sure they learned exactly what you wanted them to. That went for the Aja eyes and ears Mistress Harfor had uncovered, too. The Ajas had no right to spy on her, and if she occasionally spoon-fed them false information, it would be their own fault if they acted on it. She could not do that too often, or they would realize she had uncovered their spies, but she could at need. As you say, my lady, the world has changed, hasn't it? I'm afraid it has, Mistress Harfor. The round woman nodded sadly, but she quickly returned to business. One of the windows in the grand hall has developed a leak, my lady. I'd have seen to anything minor without bothering you, but this is a crack in the glass, which means calling in. The list of problems that needed Elaine's approval and papers that needed her signature went on. Master Nare reported on wagon loads of grain and beans and trade goods in that dusty voice of his, and announced with some surprise that the number of arsons had not decreased. 17 buildings had burned in the night. He had been sure the capture of Aranella would see an end to that, and he was rueful over being wrong. He brought death warrants in the names of Rhys Abalaman and Aldred Gomaisen for her to sign and seal. Mercenaries who turned their colors could expect no more unless their new masters prevailed. Everard Cordwin had died at the gate, or he would have gone to the gallows too. Hafin Bakovan had sent a petition asking a reward for his actions at the Farmadding gate, yet that was easy enough to reject. The presence of the Damani mercenary and his men might well have been the difference in the gate holding until Dylan arrived, but they had been earning their pay, no more. The prisoners are still being close-mouthed, I fear, Norrie said, sliding the refused petition back into his leather folder. He seemed to feel that if he did that quickly enough, it was the same as never having removed it. The dark friend Aes Sedai, I mean, my lady, and the other two. Very close-mouthed, except for, invective. Mellar is the worst with that, shouting about what he intends to do to the women who arrested him. Denny had taken her instructions literally. The guardswomen had pummeled Mellar severely, leaving him a mass of bruises from head to foot. But the Aes Sedai can be quite, vituperative as well. I fear it may be necessary to put them to the question if we hope to learn anything useful. Don't call them Aes Sedai, she snapped. Hearing Aes Sedai linked with Dark Friend made her stomach writhe. Those women had given up any right to be called Aes Sedai. She had taken their great serpent rings herself and had them melted down. That was Egwene's prerogative, not hers, and she might well be reprimanded for it, but she could not restrain herself. Ask the Lady Sylvaise for the use
It's a
of her
little
secretary.
smoky in here.
She had no questioners among her people, and according to Avienda, an unskilled questioner was likely to kill the one being put unsuccessfully to the question. When was her sister going to be allowed to visit? Like she missed Avienda. I suspect he's no such thing. Lightning lit up the windows of the sitting room, the glassed casements rattling with the boom of its thunder.
Like a bingo hall.
Norrie pressed his
Right.
fingertips together, holding the folder against his ink-stained tabard with the heels of his hands, and frowning gravely. Few people keep a private questioner, my lady. It suggests, a dark side. But then, as I understand matters, her grandfather chased away every man who showed interest in her until men stopped showing interest, and she has been virtually a prisoner since reaching her majority. That would tend to give anyone a dark view of the world. She may not, be as trustworthy as you could wish, my lady. Do you think you can bribe some of her servants to be my eyes and ears? How easy it was to ask that. Spies had become a part of her life, as much as masons or glaziers. That should be possible, my lady. I will know for certain in a day or two. Once he would have been horrified by the very idea of having anything to do with spying. All things changed eventually, it seems. His hands shifted on the folder, almost but not quite opening it. I fear the sewers in the southern part of the new city need attention urgently. Elaine sighed. Not everything changed. Burn her. Once she did have all of Andor, she suspected she would seldom have an hour to herself. What did Luon and the others want? Not long after mid-morning, Melfane Dawlish appeared and had Asanda and Neris strip Elaine to the skin so she could be weighed in a huge wooden-armed balance scale the midwife had brought along, a daily ritual. The brass pan was padded with a blanket, thank the light. The stout little woman listened to her heart through a hollow wooden tube pressed to her chest and back, thumbed back her eyelids to examine her eyes, and smelled her breath. She had Elaine make water, then held the glass jar up to the light of a stand lamp to study it. She smelled that, too, and even dipped a finger in and licked it. It was another daily ritual. Elaine averted her eyes, pulling her flower-embroidered silk robe tight around her, but she still shuddered. This time Melfane noticed. I can tell some sickness from changes in the taste, my lady. Anyway, there's worse things. My boy James, the one who carried the scale for me, his first paid job of work was mucking out in a stable. He claimed everything he ate tasted like... Her round belly shook with laughter. Well, you can imagine, my lady. Elaine could, and was glad she was not prone to nausea. She shuddered again, anyway. Asanda seemed quite composed, hands folded at her waist and watching her niece with approval, but Neris looked about to sick up. Pity he can't learn my craft, but no one would buy herbs from a man, or have a man midwife. Melfane laughed uproariously at that ridiculous notion. Wants to be apprenticed to an armorer of all things. Old for it, but there it is. Now you be sure to read to your babe. She was more than doubtful of Elaine's claim that she would have a boy and a girl. She would not accept it until she could hear their heartbeats, and that would be some few weeks yet. And have musicians play for her. She'll learn the sound of your voice. Learn to like reading and music, too. It helps in other ways besides. Makes the child brighter. You say that every time, Mistress Dawlish, Elaine said peevishly. I can remember, you know, and I am doing it. Melfane laughed again, a twinkle in her dark eyes. She accepted Elaine's bouncing moods the way she accepted the rain and lightning. You'd be surprised how many don't believe a babe in the womb can hear, but I can see the difference in those who get read to and those who don't. You mind if I have a few words with my aunt before I go, my lady? I brought her a pie and an ointment for her joints. Asanda's face reddened. Well, now that her lie was exposed, she would accept healing, or Elaine would know the reason why. At the end of the midday meal, Elaine brought up the intentions of Luan and the others with Birgitta. It was a wonderful meal, and she ate ravenously. Melfane had lambasted the cooks and every other woman in earshot for the bland diet they'd been feeding her. Today there were small pond trout grilled to perfection, cabbage rolls stuffed with crumbly white ewe's milk cheese, broad beans with pine nuts, and a tangy apple tart. Another reason it was marvelous was that nothing had the faintest hint of spoiling. To drink, there was good black tea with mint that made her
Right,
tense for a
tingle
moment
down.
until she realized it really was mint. The only thing Melfane had forbidden was wine, however well watered. Birgitta had even given up drinking herself, though it seemed impossible it could have any effect through the bond. Elaine refrained from pointing that out. Birgitta had been drinking too much to dull the pain of losing her Geigel. Elaine understood, even if she did not approve. She could not imagine what she would do if Rand died. I don't know, Birgitta said after wolfing down the last of her tart. My best guess is they've come to ask you to help them move against the Borderlanders. The one bloody thing that's sure is that they didn't bloody come to throw their support to you. That's my best guess, too. Elaine picked up crumbs of cheese with a damp fingertip and popped them into her mouth. She could have eaten as much again as had been on her plate, but Melfane had announced her strict intention to limit her weight gain. Just enough and not too much. Perhaps a cow being fattened for market felt like this. Unless they're going to demand I surrender Camelin. There's always that, Birgitta said, sounding almost cheerful. The bond said she was anything but. We still have watchers in the towers, though, and Julania and Karila have gotten work as laundresses in their camp, so we'll know if they begin to move against the city before the first man sets out. Elaine wished she did not sigh so often. Burn her, she had Aramilla, Nayan, and Elenia under guard and definitely not enjoying sharing a bed. She knew the thought should not give her pleasure, but it did. And she had gained 3 more allies, if not necessarily the most solid. At least they were tied to her inextricably now. She should have been feeling triumphant. That afternoon, Esanda and Stephanie dressed her in dark green slashed with emerald on the skirts and embroidered with silver across the bosom, down the sleeves and around the hem. For jewelry, she wore her great serpent ring and a large silver pin enameled blue, except for the shape of Trakan's keystone. The pin made her morose. Inside the house, it was said that Trakan was the keystone that held Andor together. She had not done a very good job of it so far. She and Birgitta took turns reading aloud to her babes. From histories, of course. If Melfane was right, she did not want to direct them to frivolous tales. Dry stuff it was. A plump man in red and white played the flute, while a lean woman in livery played the 12-string bittern, producing lively, joyous tunes, at least when crashes of thunder did not drown them out. Bards did not grow on trees, and Birgitta had been uncertain about allowing anyone from outside the palace near Elaine, but Mistress Harfor had found a number of accomplished musicians who had leapt at the chance to put on livery. Their pay was considerably better in the palace than in a common room, and their clothing was provided with it. Elaine thought of trying to hire a gleeman, but that made her think of Tom. Was he dry? Was he even alive? All she could do was pray. The lights send it so. Please. Mistress Harfor came to announce the arrival of Luan, Arethella, and the others, and Elaine donned the coronet of the daughter heir, a simple gold band that held a single golden rose surrounded by thorns above her brows. Casela, along with 8 guardswomen, fell in behind her, Birgitta, and Asanda as they left her apartments, boots thudding loudly on the floor tiles in step. 9 guardswomen had been among the dead when she was rescued from the Dark Friends, and that seemed to have bonded the others together even more tightly. They got lost twice, finding their way to the Grand Hall, but no one so much as murmured. What were shifting corridors when you had faced power-wrought fire and lightning? The great arch doors of the Grand Hall, carved with tall lions on both sides, stood open, and Casela took the guardswomen to stand in front of them, while she, Birgitta, and Asanda went in. The tall windows in the walls were dark with rain, except when lightning flashed, but the mirrored stand lamps against the walls and around the white columns that marched in rows along the sides of the chamber were all lit. A loud, steady plunk, plunk, plunk echoed in the vast space, drops falling into a prosaic wooden bucket standing beneath one of the colored windows set in the ceiling 20 paces overhead, where one of the rearing white lions had beads of water glistening along a crack, near scenes of battle and the faces of Andor's earliest queens. As always in this hall, Elaine felt those women judging her as she crossed the red and white floor tiles. They had built Andor with the sharpness of their minds and the blood of their sons and husbands, beginning with a single city and molding a strong nation out of the rubble of Arthur Hawkwing's empire. They had a right to judge any woman who sat on the lion throne. She suspected their visages had been placed there so every queen would feel her actions judged by history. The throne itself sat atop a white marble dais at the far end of the chamber, carved and gilded and sized for a woman, yet massive on its lion-pawed legs. The white lion, formed from moonstones set in a field of glittering rubies on its tall back, would stand above the head of the tallest woman who sat on that throne. Dylan was already standing at the foot of the dais's steps, watching Sylvace converse with Conile and Catelyn, while Branlet and Perival listened closely. Perival raked his fingers through his hair and nodded. Did Dylan have questions about Sylvace too? Lear and Karen stood apart from the rest, and apart from each other as well. Neither even glanced at the other. Having been allies against Elaine, they would not want her to think they were allied still. Asanda went to join the serving men and women in the liveries of the 8 other houses, gathered around a table that held tall silver pitchers of wine and tea. That was what informal meant in this context. Each of them would bring a single servant in attendance. For a formal meeting, Elaine would have provided all of the servants, and the grand hall would have been crowded with every noble in Camelin, every noble from the encampment below Camelin. Elorian may well be provocative, Elaine, Dylan said for about the 5th time since hearing of the safe conduct request. Her face was cool and calm, yet she must have been feeling her nerves. Her hands smoothed unnecessarily at her gold-embroidered skirts. I won't let her provoke me, Elaine replied. Neither will anyone else. I mean you, Conile, and you, Lear. Conile, in gold-worked blue, colored as quickly as Hansel had. He had gotten into a fight with a mercenary he thought had spoken disparagingly of Elaine, and had almost killed the man. It was well for him the other man had begun drawing his sword first. Even mercenaries deserved justice, and Andor was not Tyr, where nobles could kill commoners with impunity. Well, before Rand changed so many of their laws. Burn him, why was he leaping about so? I stood for you, Elaine, and that means I always stand up for you, Lear said smoothly. He looked every inch the self-confident courtier in silver-embroidered green silk with House Baron's silver-winged hammer on the collar, yet he was too smooth by half, Lear was. But I'll hold my temper, whatever Elorian says. The bond surged with fleeting contempt. Trying to demonstrate how loyal he was to Elaine, Lear had fought with mercenaries 3 times, in 2 days. The man had to have been searching for fights to manage that. If she tries to goad us, why should we bite our tongues? Catelyn demanded.
Next one.
Her red dress, embroidered with broad bands of gold at the hem and on the sleeves, did not suit her coloring, especially when her plump cheeks were crimson with anger. Her chin was raised. Perhaps she wore that large enameled pin bearing Haven's blue bear where she did, so she would be forced to keep her chin high and look down her nose at everyone. I've never allowed anyone to poke at me and walk away unscathed. An ox responds to the goad and does as the ox herd wants, Dylan said dryly. The same way you will be doing what Elorian wants if you respond to her goads. The crimson remained in Catelyn's cheeks, no doubt from embarrassment now. Rena Harfor appeared in the doorway. My ladies, she said loudly, her voice echoing in the nearly empty chamber. My lords. This was informality, when 2 sides met, and there was no knowing how far apart they were. Mistress Harfor announced the newly arrived lords and ladies in strict order of precedence, though among the houses gathered here there was not a great deal between them. Luan Norwellen, hard-faced and more gray-haired than when Elaine last saw him, his blue coat undecorated except for Norwellen's silver salmon on the high collar. Arathella Renshar, her face creased and her brown hair thick with gray, in a red riding dress ornately worked with gold, and a large ruby-studded pin that displayed the 3 golden hounds. Pelavar Koalan, tall and lean, his dark hair receding till he almost looked as if he had shaved the front of his head like a Kyrian, and in silver-embroidered blue with twinned red roses worked on his collar, the roses of Coalon. Aemlyn Caran, plump in grey silk, with the 3 golden arrows climbing her sleeves, and so thick on her bosom she looked like a bristling quiver. Elorian Tremaine, not so plump as Elaine recalled, but still pretty in green-slashed blue embroidered with golden-antlered white stags, the white stag of Tremaine on the sleeves. Abella Pendar, his angular face stern beneath grey hair, in dark grey with the 3 golden stars on his collar. They walked up the grand hall together, trailed by their servants, but not grouped as announced. Elorian and Abella walked with Luon, Palavar and Aemlyn with Arafella, 2 paces between the groups. So, they asked for safe conduct as one, yet they were not one. That made a demand for surrender a little less likely. Even open enemies could act in concert at times. Divided skirts and snug breeches glistened damply. The finest cloak could not protect a person completely in a downpour like this. They would not be in their best tempers. "Be welcome," she told them as their servants peeled away to join the others. "Will you take wine or tea? The wine is hot and spiced. This seems a wintry day for spring." Luon opened his mouth, but Elorian spoke first. "At least you're not sitting on the throne." Her face might have been carved from marble, and her voice was that hard and cold. "I half expected you to be." Thunder rolled overhead. Luon looked pained. Arafella rolled her eyes as if she were hearing something she had heard all too often before. Lear stirred, but Elaine fixed him with a steady look, and he gave a small apologetic bow. "I have no right to sit on the throne, Elorian," she replied calmly. Might please let her mood hold steady now. Yet there was an unintended touch of bite in that. Perhaps she was not so calm as she wished to be. Elorian sneered. "If you're waiting for Danine to make your 10, you'll have a long wait. Danine spent the last succession visiting her manors. She never declared for anyone." Elaine
Hey,
smiled.
Soy,
It
how
was
you
difficult.
doing?
A succession was when one house succeeded another on the throne. "I will have tea." Elorian blinked, but
Hope
it
you're
sparked
doing
the
well,
others to
Soy.
announce what they would take. Only Elaine, Birgitta, Branlet, and Perival took tea. Everyone sniffed at their cups, whether silver cups of wine or porcelain teacups, before taking a sip. Elaine felt no insult. Food and wine could be fine in the kitchens, and tainted by the time it reached the table. There was never any telling where or when spoilage would strike. The tea had a faint tang of ginger, but not enough to overwhelm the taste of good Tremalking black. "I see you've gathered most of your support among the children and Aramilla's leavings," Elorian said. Catelyn turned as red as her dress, and Branlet straightened angrily until Perival put a hand on his arm and shook his head. A level-headed boy, Perival, and bright beyond his years. Lear managed to restrain himself this time, but Conile started to say something sharp before Elaine's firm look snapped
Yeah.
his teeth shut.
I'll be right back.
Karen merely returned Elorian's spiteful stare stolidly. Karen was not very intelligent, but little ruffled her. "You must have had a reason for asking this meeting," Elaine said. "If it was merely to offer insults..." She let that trail off. She had her own reasons for wanting this meeting. If they had asked for her to come to them, she would have, without asking for safe conduct. Feeling a pulse of anger through the bond, she took a firm rein on hers. Birgitta wore a scowl directed at Elorian like a dagger. If they began feeding one another's temper, that did not bear thinking about, not here, not now. Elorian opened her mouth again, and this time Luon cut her off. "We've come to ask for a truce, Elaine." A flash of lightning lit the northern windows and those in the ceiling, but the interval to thunder said it had been some distance off. "A truce? Are we at war, Luon? Has someone declared for the throne that I haven't heard of?" 6 sets of eyes swung to Dialin, who grunted. "Fools! I told you, and you wouldn't believe me. Perhaps you'll believe this. When Sylvain, Carand, and Lear sent their proclamations of support, I sent my own. Taravin stands for Trakand, and the whole of Andor will know it soon enough. Elorian colored angrily and managed to make even that seem cold. Aemlyn took a long drink, looking thoughtful. Arabella allowed a touch of disappointment to touch her face before it returned to a mask nearly as hard as Elorian's. Be that as it may, Luan said. We still want, if not a truce, then a temporary agreement. He drank a small swallow from his wine cup and shook his head sadly. Even gathering everything we can, we'll have a difficult time defeating the Borderlanders. But if we fail to act together, they'll carve up Andor once they decide to move. Frankly, I'm surprised they've remained in one place this long. Their men ought to be well rested by now, even after a 1,000-league march. Lightning lit the southern windows brightly, and thunder crashed so loudly it seemed the glass panes should shiver. Close, that one. I expected them to be in Temurundi by now myself, Elaine said. But I believe their reason for sitting in one place is a fear of sparking a war if they come too near Camelin. They seem to be trying to find a way to Murundi using country roads. You know what condition those are in this time of year. They want no war with us. When I gave them permission to cross Andor, they told me they were looking for the Dragon Reborn. Elorian spluttered, and chips of ice should have come from her mouth. When you... What? You prate of how you have no right to sit on the throne, yet? And then you arrogate to yourself the right of an Aes Sedai, Elorian. Elaine held up her right hand so they could not miss the golden great serpent encircling the third finger. Her own voice was frosty despite all she could do. I did not speak as daughter heir or even high seat of House Trakand. I spoke as Elaine Aes Sedai of the Green Aja. Had I not, they would have come anyway. They were very short of food and fodder. Had I tried to stop them, had anyone tried to stop them, there would have been war. They are determined to find the Dragon Reborn. It would have been a war Andor had faint chance of winning.
Dabs
You
up.
speak of acting together, Luan? Gather all of Andor's strength, and we could nearly match their numbers. But 2 in 3 of ours would be men who can handle a halberd or spear but spend most of their days behind a plow. Every man of theirs is a long-serving armsman who would not be surprised to face Trollocs any day of his life. Instead of a war that would soak Andor in blood and cripple her for a generation, we have the Borderlanders crossing our nation peacefully. I have them watched. They pay for the food and fodder they need, and pay well. Another time, with other listeners, she would have laughed over that. Andoran farmers would try to pry high prices out of the Dark One. The worst they've done is flog a few horse thieves, and if they should have been handed over to a magistrate, I can't fault the Borderlanders far for it. Now tell me, Elorian, what would you have done differently, and how? Elorian blinked, icily sullen, then sniffed dismissively and sipped at her wine. And what do you plan for this Black Tower? Abella asked quietly. I suspect you have a plan for them, too. Did he suspect her other reason for letting the Borderlanders cross Andor? Let him, so long as he did not give it voice. So long as he kept silent, her motive seemed purely for Andor's good. That was hypocritical, no bones about it, but realistic as well. She had spoken truthfully concerning her other reasons, but that one, spoken aloud, could cost her. She still needed one more house, and it looked as if Candread had to be it. But Danine would never move if she thought Elaine was trying to force her into it. Nothing, she told him. I send guardsmen periodically to ride around the Black Tower grounds and remind them they are in Andor and subject to Andor's laws. But aside from that, I can do no more than I could if the White Tower were somehow transported to Camelin. For a long moment they stared at her, all 6 of them, unblinking. Pandar stands for Trakand, Abella said suddenly, and right atop him, Luan said, Norwellen stands for Trakand. Lightning flashed overhead, brightening the colored windows in the ceiling. Elaine kept herself from swaying with an effort. Birgitta's face was smooth, but the bond carried amazement. It was done. She had 11, and the throne was hers. The more who stand for her, the better for Andor, Dailen sounded a touch dazed herself. Stand with me for Trakand. There was another pause, longer, full of exchanged glances, but then, one by one, Arathella, Pelavar, and Aemlyn announced that their houses stood for Trakand. Doing so for Dailen, though. Elaine would have to remember that. Perhaps she could win their loyalty in time, but for the present they supported her for Dailen's sake. She has the throne, Elorian said, as cold as ever. The rest is fluff and feathers. Elaine tried to make her voice warm. Will you dine with us this evening, Elorian? At least remain until the rain abates. I have my own cooks, Elorian replied, turning away toward the doors. Her serving woman came running to take her cup and return it to the table. As soon as the rain stops, I will be leaving for Sheldon. I've been away too long. Tarman Gaiden is coming soon, Elorian, Elaine said. You won't be able to remain on your estates then. Elorian paused, looking over her shoulder. When Tarman Gaiden comes, Tremaine rides for the last battle, and we ride behind the Lion of Andor. Thunder boomed as she strode out of the grand hall with her serving woman at her heels. Will you all join me in my apartments? Elaine asked the others. Behind the Lion of Andor, but not a word about behind Elaine Trakand. Nearly half her support was suspect one way or another. Jared Saland was still on the
Quantum
loose with
Digital,
a
how
not
you doing?
inconsiderable force, and she would have trouble from Elorian eventually. It was never this way in stories. In stories, everything was always wrapped up neatly by the end. Real life was much messier. Still, she had the throne at last. There was still the coronation, but that was a formality now. As she led the procession from the grand hall, chatting with Luan and Pelavar,
SOS?
thunder rolled overhead like
what do you
martial
mean?
drums beating the march for Tarman Gaiden. How long before Andor's banners had to march to the last battle?
Chapter 36. Under an Oak. The sun stood well above the mountains as Kareed rode through the trees toward the so-called Navidi Narrows, perhaps 2 leagues ahead. The 5-mile-wide gap in the mountains carried the road from Ebudar to Lugard, a mile south of him. Well short of the Narrows, though, he would find the camp Ajimbura had located for him. Ajimbura had not been fool enough to try entering the camp, so Kareed still did not know whether he was riding into a death trap for nothing. No, not for nothing. For the High Lady Tuon. Any Death Watch guard was ready to die for her. Their honor was duty, and duty often meant death. The sky held only billowing white clouds with no threat of rain. He had always hoped to die in sunlight. He had brought just a small party. Ajimbura on his white-footed chestnut to show the way, of course. The wiry little man had cut off his white-streaked red braid, a measure of his great devotion. The hill tribes took these braids as trophies from those they killed in their endless feuds, and to be without one was to be disgraced in the eyes of all the tribes and families, a self-proclaimed coward. That devotion was to Kareed, rather than the High Lady or the Crystal Throne, but Kareed's own devotion was such that it came to the same thing. 2 of the guards rode at Kareed's back, their red and green armor buffed till it shone, like his own. Artha and a pair of gardeners strode along with their long-hafted axes on their shoulders, easily keeping pace with the horses. Their armor glistened as well. Melatine, the High Lady's Dersuldam, her long graying hair tied with a bright red ribbon today, was on a high-stepping gray, the silvery length of an Adam connecting her left wrist to Mylan's neck. There had been little that could be done to make those 2 appear more impressive, but the Adam and Melatine's blue dress, the red panels on skirts and bosom, holding silver forked lightning bolts, should draw the eye. Taken altogether, no one should notice Ajimbura at all. The rest were back with Musenge, in case it truly was a death trap. He had considered using another Damani than Mylan. The tiny woman with the face he could never put his age to almost bounced in her saddle with eagerness to lay eyes on the High Lady again. She was not properly composed. Still, she could do nothing without Melatine, and she was useless as a weapon, a fact that had made her hang her head when he pointed it out to the Dersuldam. She had needed consoling, her Suldam petting her and telling her what beautiful skylights she made, how wonderful her healing was. Even thinking about that made Kareed shudder. Taken in the abstract, it might seem a wonderful thing, wounds undone in moments, but he thought he would need to be near death before he would let anyone touch him with the power. And yet, if it could have saved his wife Kalia, no. The weapons had been left with Musenge. If there was a battle today, it would be of a different sort. The first bird call he heard seemed no different from others he had heard that morning, but it was repeated ahead and then again. Just one call each time. He spotted a man up in tall oak with a crossbow that tracked him as he rode. Seeing him was not easy.
Okay.
His breastplate and open-faced helmet were painted a dull green that faded into the tree's foliage. A length of red cloth tied around his left arm helped, though. If he really wanted to hide, he should have removed that. Kareed motioned to Ajimbura, and the wiry little man grinned at him, a wizened, blue-eyed rat, before allowing his chestnut to fall back behind the guards. His long knife was under his coat today. He should pass for a servant. Soon enough, Kareed was riding into the camp itself. It had no tents or shelters of any kind, but there were long horse lines laid out in orderly fashion, and many more men in green breastplates. Heads turned to watch his party pass, but few men were on their feet, and fewer held a crossbow. A fair number of them were asleep on their blankets, doubtless tired from all the hard riding they had been doing by night. So the bird call had told them he was not enough to present a danger. They had the look of well-trained soldiers, but he had expected as much. What he had not expected was how few they were. Oh, the trees might be hiding some, but surely the camp held no more than 7,000 or 8,000 men, far too few to have carried out the campaign Luna had described. He felt a sudden tightness in his chest. Where were the rest? The High Lady might be with one of the other bands. He hoped Ajimbura was taking note of the numbers. Before he had gone far, a short man mounted on a tall dun met him and reined in where he had to stop or ride the man down. The front half of his beard was shaved and appeared to be powdered of all things. He was no popinjay, though. His dark coat might be silk, yet he wore the same dull green breastplate as the common soldiers. His eyes were hard and expressionless as he scanned Melatine and Mylan, the Ogier. His face did not change as his gaze returned to Kareed. Lord Matt described that armor to us, he said, in accents even quicker and more clipped than those of the Altarans. To what do we owe the honor of a visit from the Death Watch Guard? Lord Matt? Who under the light was Lord Matt? Gurik Kareed, Kareed said. I wish to speak with the man who calls himself Tom Maryland. Dalmanus Delavind, the man said, finding manners. You want to talk to Tom? Well, I see no harm in it. I will take you to him. Kareed healed Aldazar after Delavind. The man had made no mention of the obvious, that he and the others could not be allowed to leave and carry word of his army's location. He had some manners. At least they would not be allowed to leave unless Kareed's mad plan worked. Musenge gave him only 1 chance in 10 of success, 1 in 5 of living. Personally, he himself believed the odds longer, but he had to make the attempt. And Maryland's presence argued in favor of the High Lady's presence. Delavind dismounted at an oddly domestic scene among the trees. People on camp stools or blankets around a small fire beneath a spreading oak where a kettle was heating. Kareed stepped down from his saddle, motioning the guards and Ajimbura to dismount as well. Melatine and Mylan remained on their mounts for the advantage of height. Of all people, Mistress Anand, who had once owned the inn where he stayed in Abu Dar, was sitting on one of the 3-legged stools reading a book. She no longer wore one of those revealing dresses he had enjoyed looking at, but her close-fitting necklace still dangled that small jeweled knife onto her impressive bosom. She closed her book and gave him a small
yes,
nod
it's
as
by
if he had
Robert
returned
Jordan.
to the wandering woman
It's
after an absence of
the
a few
Wheel of Time
hours.
series.
Her hazel eyes were quite
We're
composed.
currently on
Perhaps the plot was even more
Life of
intricate than
Dreams
the seeker
is
Moore had thought.
book
A
11.
tall, lean, white-haired
Having
man with mustaches
kind of,
nearly as long as Hartha's was sitting cross-legged on a striped blanket
hair for a
across a
little
stone's
bit.
board from a slender woman with her hair in many beaded braids. He quirked an eyebrow at Kareed, shook his head, and returned to perusing the cross-hatched board.
That's one of my
She
favorite
glared pure
series.
hatred
I've read
at
that
Kareed
series
and those behind him.
several times
A
already.
gnarled old fellow with long white hair was lying on another blanket with a remarkably ugly young boy, playing some game or other on a piece of red cloth spider-webbed with black lines. They sat up, the boy studying the ogier with interest, the man with one hand hovering as if to reach for a knife beneath his coat. A dangerous man and wary. Perhaps he was Marilyn. Two men and two women sitting together on camp stools had been conversing when Kareed rode up, but as he was stepping down, a stern-faced woman stood and fixed her blue eyes on his in very nearly a challenge. She wore a sword on a wide leather strap slanting across her chest, the way some sailors did. Her hair was close-cropped, rather than cut in the style of the low blood. Her fingernails were short, and none were lacquered, but he was certain she was
Yeah,
Union Kamara.
he
A
passed away
heavy-set
from
man with hair as short as
away
hers and
before he
one
was
of
able
those
to
odd
finish
Ileana
it, but
beards stood beside her.
he already
One
had
hand
it
on the
laid
hilt
out
of a short sword,
and everything
staring at
on
Kareed as
how
if
he
intended
wanted to
to second her
finish.
challenge.
And
A pretty woman with
he
dark,
has had his
waist-long hair,
wife look
same
for
rosebud mouth
author
as the
to
cherub on her stood.
finish
And for
writing
a
the book
moment it seemed she
for
might kneel or
everyone
prostrate herself.
because he had
But
everything
then she
laid out
straightened
on
and looked him right in the eyes.
how he wanted it to
The
end,
last man,
what he
a
wanted to
lean
happen.
fellow
He
in
just
a
made
peculiar
someone to
red cap, who looked carved from dark
do
wood,
everything
gave
else.
a loud laugh and flung
And
his
he
arm
found
around her.
was it
The
Brandon
grinning stare he
Sanderson.
gave Kareed could only be called triumphant. Tom,
Because I think it was
Elodin said, this is
after
Turret
this
Kareed.
book.
He wants to talk with a man who calls himself
Let me
Tom
check real
Marilyn.
quick.
With me, the lean white-haired man said, rising awkwardly.
Yeah,
His right leg appeared
it was
slightly
Knife of
stiff.
Dreams, which was the
An old
last
battle
one that he
injury,
wrote,
perhaps?
officially wrote
But
by
I don't
himself
call myself
before he
Tom
passed
Marilyn.
away.
It's my name, though I'm surprised you know it. What do you want of me?
Oh yeah, he definitely did some
Kareed
good
removed
work.
his helmet, but before he could open his mouth, a pretty woman with large brown eyes rushed
I'll
up,
be
pursued by
right back.
two others. All three had those eye-to-eye faces, 1 minute looking 20, the next twice that, the third somewhere in the middle. It was very disconcerting. That's Shireen, the pretty woman cried, staring at Mylan. Release her! You do not understand, Jolene, one of the women with her said angrily. Thin-lipped, with a narrow nose, she looked as if she could chew rocks. She do not be Shireen any longer. She would have betrayed us, given a chance. Teslin is right, Jolene, the third woman. Handsome rather than pretty, she had long black hair that fell in waves to her waist. She would have betrayed us. I don't believe it, Edicina, Jolene snapped. You will free her immediately, she told Melitine, or I'll... Suddenly she gasped. I did tell you, Teslin said bitterly. A young man in a wide-brimmed black hat galloped up on a dark, blunt-nosed chestnut with a deep chest and flung himself out of the saddle. What's bloody going on here? He demanded, striding up to the fire. Kareed ignored him. The High Lady Tuon had ridden up with the young man on a black and white horse with markings like none he had ever seen. Solucia was at her side on a dun, her head wrapped in a scarlet scarf, but he had eyes only for the High Lady. Short black hair covered her head, but he could never mistake that face. She spared him only one expressionless glance before returning to a study of the young man. Kareed wondered whether she recognized him. Probably not. It had been a long time since he had served in her bodyguard. He did not look over his shoulder, but he knew that the reins of Ajimbura's chestnut were now held by
I
one
didn't
of the
know
guards.
he was only
Apparently
58.
unarmed,
I
and
thought
his
he was older
distinctive
than
braids
that.
gone, he should have no problem leaving the camp. The sentries would never see the little man. Ajimbura was a good runner as well as stealthy. Soon Musenge would know that the High Lady was indeed here. She has shielded us, Matt, Jolene said, and the young man snatched off his hat and strode to Melitine's horse as if he intended to seize the bridle. He was long-limbed, though he could not be called tall, and he wore a black silk scarf tied around his neck and dangling onto his chest. That made him the one everyone had called Tylin's toy, as if being the Queen's plaything were the most important feature of him. Likely it was. Playthings seldom had another side to them. Strange, but he hardly seemed handsome enough for that. He did look fit, though. Release the shield, he told her, as if he expected obedience. Kareed's eyebrows rose. This was the plaything? Melatine and Mylan gasped almost as one, and the young man barked a laugh. You see, it doesn't work on me. Now you bloody well release the shields, or I'll bloody well haul you out of the saddle and paddle your bottoms. Melatine's face darkened. Few people dared speak to a dare Sultan. Release the shields, Melatine, Kareed said. The Marath, the money, was on the point of embracing Sayadar, she said, instead of obeying. There's no telling what she might have. Release the shields, he said firmly, and release the
58
power.
is definitely young.
The young man
I
gave a
didn't know he was
satisfied
that
nod,
young.
then suddenly spun, pointing a finger at the three Aes Sedai.
I'm still in my
Now
40s.
don't you
I'll be
bloody well start. She's let go of the power, you do it too. Go
next
ahead.
month.
Again he nodded, for all the world as if he were sure they had obeyed. From the way Melatine was staring at him, perhaps he was. Maybe he was an Ashaman? Perhaps Ashaman could detect the Damani's channeling somehow. That hardly seemed likely, but it was all Kareed could think of. Yet that hardly squared with how Tylan reportedly had treated the young man. One of these days, Matt Coffin, Jolene said acidly, someone will teach you to show proper respect to Aes Sedai, and I hope I am there to see it. The High Lady in Seleucia laughed uproariously. It was good to see she had managed to keep her spirits up in captivity. Doubtless her maid's companionship had helped. But it was time to get on, too. Time to take his mad gamble.
Right. At
General
least that's how I
Marilyn,
feel most of the
Kareed
time
said.
until
You fought a short but
body reminds me
remarkable
otherwise.
campaign and achieved miracles at keeping your forces undetected. But your luck is about to run out. General Chyson deduced your real purpose. He has turned his army around and is marching for the Melvidi Narrows as fast as he can. He will be here in 2 days. I have 10,000 men not far from here, enough to pin you until he arrives. But the High Lady Tuan would be in danger, and I want to avoid that. Let me leave with her, and I will allow you and your men to depart unhindered. You can be well the other side of the mountains into the Mulvane Gap before Chyson arrives, and into Murundi before he can catch you. The only other choice is annihilation. Chyson has enough men to wipe you out. It won't be a battle. 100,000 men against 8,000 will be a slaughter. They heard him out, every face as blank as if they were stunned. They schooled themselves well. Or perhaps they were stunned at Marilyn's plan apparently unraveling at the last instant.
hell yeah.
Marilyn stroked one of his white
Appreciate it.
mustaches with a long finger.
I know I
He
do
seemed to be
mine
hiding a smile.
kind of late,
I fear you have mistaken me,
but
General
usually my nighttime routine
For
because
the
I have
space of a
trouble
sentence, his
sleeping.
voice became extremely resonant.
So
I am
smoke
a
a little
Gleeman,
bit, have
a
a back
position
or a
higher
book
than
going,
Fort Bog, to be sure, but
and if
no
it helps
general.
other people
The man you
unwind,
want is
relax,
Lord
and
Matron Coffin.
get ready for the night,
He made a small
and that's
bow toward
bonus.
the young man who was settling his
But
flat
definitely,
top hat back
definitely
on his head.
appreciate you stopping by.
Kareed frowned. Highland's toy was the general? Were they playing a game with him? You have about 100 men, Death Watch guards, and maybe 20 gardeners, Coffin said calmly. From what I hear, that could make an even fight against 5 times their number for most soldiers. But the band aren't most soldiers, and I have a sight more than 600. As for Chyson, if that's the fellow who pulled back through the Narrows, even if he has figured out what I was up to, he couldn't get back in less than 5 days. My scouts' last reports had him pushing southwest along the Abu Dar Road as fast as he could march. The real question is this, though. Can you get Tuan to the Terracin Palace safely? Farid felt as if Hartha had kicked him in the belly, and not only because the man had used the High Lady's name so casually. You mean to let me take her away? He said incredulously. If she trusts you,
I had to
if
give
you
that
can get her
some
to the
thought.
palace safely.
Quantum digital.
She's in danger till she reaches that.
I usually
In
do
case you don't know it, your whole bloody
this
ever
live
victorious
pretty much
flaming
every
army
night.
is ready to slit her throat or bash in her
And
head with a
then
rock.
The other day, me and
Farid said,
my
more
older or
confident
my
tone.
brother
Why would this man just release the High Lady after the White
do
Power
our
had gone
smoking
to all the
live every
trouble of
day too,
kidnapping her?
but it's on his channel.
Why, after fighting that short, bloody campaign? We will die to the man if that is what is needed to see her safe. It will be best if we set out immediately. Before the man changed his mind, before Kareed woke from this fever dream. It surely seemed a fever dream. Not so fast. Bothan turned toward the High Lady. Tuan, do you trust this man to see you safe to the palace in Abu Dar?
Hell yeah,
Farid stifled
appreciate
an
it.
impulse to wince.
Definitely
General and
appreciate
lord
that.
the man might be, but he had no right to use the High Lady's name so.
I've been at it for a while. I'm slowly
I
getting
trust
there.
the Death Watch guards with my life, the High Lady replied
I
calmly.
think tomorrow we'll be
And
starting
you, more than any
a
other.
new book, and it might actually
She
be
tabled Farid with a smile. Even as a child, smiles
next book
were
in the
her had been
series.
rare.
So it'll
Do
be the
you,
one
by
that
any chance, still have my banner, General
Brandon
Farid? He
Sanderson
bowed to her formally.
helped out on
The manner of her speaking
to
told
help
him
him
she was
finish.
still
Because it was the
under
last
veil.
3 books. Because it's supposed to be
Forgiveness,
one book,
my lady.
but they broke it
I
onto 3
lost
parts
everything in the
because
great
how
fire
big
of
it
Sohima.
was.
That means you kept it for 10 years. You have my commiseration on the loss of
That's
your
what more
wife
should I do for this
and of
live
your
is
son, though he died bravely
chill,
and well.
listen to a book,
Few men will enter a burning
smoke a little
building
bit.
once. He saved 5 people before he was overcome. Kareed's throat tightened. She had followed news of him. All he could do was bow again, more deeply. Enough of that, Coffin muttered. You're going to knock your head on the ground if you keep that up. As soon as she and Selusha can get their things together, you take them out of here and ride hard.
Smoker box.
Almonas, that's the
I
band.
don't know.
It
There's a
isn't that I
couple of
don't
them that
trust
I
you, Kareed,
watch.
but I think I'll sleep easier beyond the
I
narrows.
don't know. I might have.
Matrim Cawthon is my husband, the High Lady said in a loud, clear voice. Everyone froze where they stood. Matrim Cawthon is my husband. Kareed felt as if Hartha had kicked him again. No, not Hartha. Aldazar. What madness was this? Cawthon looked like a man watching an arrow fly towards his face, knowing he had no chance to dodge. Bloody Matrim Cawthon is my husband. That is the wording you used, is it not? This had to be a fever dream. It took a minute before Matt could speak. Burn him, it seemed to take a bloody hour before he could move. When he could, he snatched off his hat, strode to Tuan, and seized the razor's bridle. She looked down at him, cool as any queen on a bloody throne. All those battles with the flaming dice rattling away in his head, all those skirmishes and raids, and they had to stop when she said a few words. Well, at least this time he knew what had happened that was bloody fateful for Matt Bloody
Number
Cawthon.
2 down.
Why? I mean, I knew you were going to sooner or later, but why now? I like you. Maybe more than like you. And I enjoy kissing you, he thought. Kareed grunted. But you haven't behaved like a woman in love. You're ice half the time and spend most of the rest digging under my skin. Love? Tuan sounded surprised. Perhaps we will come to love one another, Matrim. But I have always known I would marry to serve the Empire. What do you mean you knew that I was going to speak the words? Call me Matt. Only his mother had ever called him Matrim when he was in trouble, and his sisters when they were carrying tales to get him in trouble. Your name is Matrim. What did you mean? He sighed. The woman never wanted much, just her own way, like just about every other woman he had ever known. I went through a Tirangriel to somewhere else, another world maybe. The people there aren't really people. They look like snakes. But they'll answer 3 questions for you, and their answers are always true. One of mine was that I'd marry the daughter of the 9 moons. But you haven't answered my question. Why now? A faint smile on her lips, Tuan leaned down from her saddle and rapped him hard in the top of his head with her knuckles. Your superstitions are bad enough, Matrim, but I won't tolerate lies. An amusing lie, true, but still a lie. It's the light's own truth, he protested, clapping his hat on. Maybe it would give him some protection. You could learn for yourself if you could make yourself talk to an Aes Sedai. They could tell you about the Aelfin and the Eelfin. It could be the truth, Edicina piped up as if she were being helpful. The Aelfin can be reached through a Tirangriel in the Stone of Tyr, so I understand. And supposedly they give true answers. Matt glared at her. A fat lot of help she was with her so I understands and supposedlys. Tuan continued to stare at him as if Edicina had not opened her mouth. I answered your question, Tuan, so you answer mine. You know that the money can tell fortunes? She gave him a stern look, like expecting him to call it superstition, but he nodded curtly. Some Aes Sedai could foretell the future. Why not the money? I asked Lydia to tell mine just before I landed at Abu
Check
Dhabi.
that out.
This is what she said. Beware the fox that makes the ravens fly, for he will marry you and carry you away. Beware the man who remembers Hawkwing's face, for he will marry you and set you free.
I'll go ahead and
Beware the
ring his
man of
bell.
the red hand, for him you will marry and none other. It was your ring that caught my eye first. He thumbed the long ring unconsciously, and she smiled. A small smile, but a smile. A fox apparently startling 2 ravens in flight, and 9 crescent moons. Suggestive, wouldn't you say? And just now you fulfilled the second part, so I knew for certain it was you. Solution made a sound in her throat, and Tuan waggled fingers at her. The bosomy little woman subsided, adjusting her headscarf, but the look she shot at Matt should have been accompanied by a dagger in her hand. He laughed mirthlessly. Blood and bloody ashes. The ring was a carver's try-piece, bought only because it stuck on his finger. He would give up those memories of Hawkwing's face, along with every other old memory, if it would get the bloody snakes out of his head. And yet those things had gained him a wife. The band of the Red Hand would never have existed without those old memories of battles. Seems to me being Taviran works on me as much as it does on anybody else. For a moment, he thought she was going
Oh
to wrap him
shit.
again.
He's from
He gave
Cypress
her
Hill.
his
Hell
best
yeah.
smile.
Most definitely have to check
One
it
more
out.
kiss before you leave.
It's been a while since I've
I'm
listened
not
to
in
some
the mood
Cypress Hill.
at the moment, she said coolly. That hanging magistrate was back. All prisoners to be condemned immediately. Perhaps later. You could return to Abu Dhabi with me. You have an honored place in the Empire now. He did not hesitate before shaking his head. There was no honored place waiting for Lylewyn or Doman, no place at all for the Aes Sedai or the band. The next time I see Seanchan, I expect it will be on the field somewhere, Tuan. Burn him it would be. His life seemed to run that way no matter what he did. You're not my enemy, but your empire is. Nor are you my enemy, husband, she said coolly. But I live to serve the empire. Well, I suppose you'd better get your things. He trailed off at the sound of a cantering horse approaching. Vannin reined in a rangy gray beside Tuan, eyed Kareed and the other Death Watch guards, then spat through a gap in his teeth and leaned on the high pommel of his saddle. There's 10,000 or so soldiers at a little town about 5 miles west of here, the fat man told Matt. Only one man Seanchan near as I could learn. The rest are Altarans, Tarabanners, Amadisians. All mounted. Thing is, they're asking after fellows wearing armor like that. He nodded toward Kareed. And rumor says the one of them that kills a girl that sounds a lot like the High Lady gets himself 100,000 crowns gold. Their mouths are dripping for it. I can slip past them, Kareed said. His bluff face looked fatherly. His voice sounded like a drawn sword. And if you can't? Matt asked quietly. It can't be chance they're this close. They've caught some sniff of you. One more smell might be all it takes to kill Tuan. Kareed's face darkened. Do you intend to go back on your word? A drawn blade that might be used soon. Worse, Tuan was watching, looking at Matt like that hanging magistrate in truth. burn him. If she died, something would shrivel up inside him. And the only way to stop it, to be sure it was stopped, was to do what he hated worse than work. Once he had thought that fighting battles, much as he hated it, was still better than work.
Well, here it is. I'll
Near
read
enough
his note
900
too.
dead in the space of a few days had changed his mind. No, he said, she goes with you. But you leave me a dozen of your Death Watch guards and some of the gardeners. If I'm going to take these people off your back,
In the
I need
west.
them to think I'm you.
I'm in New Mexico.
Tuan abandoned most of the clothing Matrim had bought for her, since she would need to travel light. The little cluster of red silk rosebuds he had given her she tucked away in her saddlebags, folded in a linen cloth, as carefully as if it were
Yeah,
grown
I'll
glass.
tell him.
She had no farewells to make except for Mistress Annan. She really would miss their discussions, so she and Selusha were ready to ride quickly. Mylan smiled so broadly at the sight of her that she had to pat the little Damani. It seemed that word of what had happened had spread, because as they rode through the camp with the Death Watch guards, men of the band stood and bowed to her. It was very like reviewing regiments in Shandar. "What do you make of him?" she asked Karid, once they were away from the soldiers and beginning to canter. There was no need to say which he she meant. "It is not my place to make judgments, High Lady," he said gravely. His head swiveled, keeping watch on the surrounding trees. "I serve the Empire and the Empress. May she live forever." As do we
live
all,
about
Gunner General. But I
probably
ask your
like 2
gentleman.
hours away from
"A good general, High Lady," he
Roswell.
replied without hesitation. "Brave, but not overly brave. He won't get himself killed just to show how brave he is, I think. And he is adaptable. A man of many layers. And if you will forgive me, High Lady, a man in love with you. I saw how he looked at you." In love with her? Perhaps. She thought she might be able to come to love him. Her mother had loved her father, it was said. And a man of many layers. Matrim Coffin made an onion look like an apple. She rubbed a hand over her head. She still was not accustomed to the feel of hair on her head. "I will need a razor first thing." "It may be best to wait until Ebudar, High Lady." "No," she said gently. "If I die, I will die as who I am. I have removed the veil." "As you say, Highness." Smiling, he saluted, gauntleted fists striking over his heart hard enough that steel clanged on steel. "If we die, we will die as who we are."
Chapter 37. Prince of the Ravens. Leaning on the tall pommel of his saddle, Ashandarai slanted across Pips's neck, Matt frowned at the sky. The sun was well past its noon height. If Vannon and those Death Watch guards did not return soon, he might find himself fighting a battle with the
for the
sun in
most part.
crossbowman's eyes, or worse, in
Let's
twilight.
see, what are we at right now?
Worst of all, dark clouds loomed over the mountains to the east. The gusting wind was out of the north. No help there. Rain would put the weasel in the
Right
henyard.
now it's
Bowstrings fared poorly in rain.
it's 46
So any rain
degrees
was a few
Fahrenheit.
hours off, with luck. But he had never noticed his luck saving him from getting soaked in a downpour. He had not dared wait until tomorrow. Those fellows hunting Tuan might have gotten another whiff of Karid's men, and then he would have had to try attacking them or laying an ambush and carry it out before they could catch Karid. Better to have them come to him at a place of his choosing. Finding the proper spot had not been difficult between Master Roydell's collection of maps on the one hand and Vannon and the other scouts on the other. Aludra was fussing over one of her tall, metal-bound lofting tubes, beaded braids hiding her face as she examined something at the broad wooden base.
Yeah,
She
Roswell.
wished she had been willing to remain with the pack animals like Tom and Mistress Annan. Even Noel
I
had
live
been
like a
willing to
couple
stay,
hours away from
if
there.
only to help Julian and Amathera make sure Olver did not run off to watch the battle. The boy was dead eager, which could soon lead to plain dead. Matters had been bad enough when only Harnan and the other three had been corrupting Olver, but now he had half the men teaching him how to use a sword or dagger, or fight with his hands and feet, and apparently filling his head with tales of heroes from the way he had been behaving, begging to go on raids with Matt and the like. Aludra was near as bad. Anybody could have used one of those strikers to light the fuse once she had loaded that tube, but she insisted on doing it herself. She was a fierce woman, Aludra was, and none too pleased at finding herself on the same side as Sean Chan, however temporary the arrangement was. It seemed wrong to her that they would see some of her handiwork without being on the receiving end. Lylwyn and Donan
Cool.
sat their horses nearby, keeping an eye on her, as much to make sure she did nothing foolish as to protect her. Matt hoped Lylwyn did nothing foolish herself. Since there was apparently only one Sean Chan with the people they would fight today, she had decided it was all right to be there. And the way she glared at Musenge and the other Death Watch guards, it seemed she might think she had something to prove to them. The three Aes Sedai, standing together with their
I had to
reins in
check that
hand,
out.
cast dark looks at the Sean Chan too, as did Blerick and Fen, who caressed their sword hilts, perhaps unconsciously. Jolene and her two warders had been the only ones aghast at Shireen's willing departure with Tuon. What an Aes Sedai felt on any subject was usually how her warders felt on it too, but the memory of being leashed had to be too fresh for Edicina or Teslin to feel comfortable around Sean Chan soldiers. Bethamin and Sita stood very meekly, hands folded at their waists, a little apart from the sisters. Bethamin's light-colored bay nudged her shoulder with his nose, and the tall, dark woman half reached up to stroke the animal before snatching her hand back down and resuming her humble pose. They still would take no part. Jolene and Edicina had made that plain, yet it seemed they wanted the two women under their eyes to make sure of it. The Sean Chan women plainly were looking at anything but the Sean Chan soldiers. For that matter, Bethamin and Sita and Lylwyn might as well not have existed for all of Musenge and that lot. Burn him, there were so many tensions in the air he could almost feel that hanging rope around his neck again.
Oh,
Pip
shit.
stamped a hoof, impatient at standing in
Had
one
to
place
check
so
that
long,
out,
and Matt patted his
pronto.
neck, then scratched the scar forming on his own jaw. Tuon's ointments had stung as badly as she said they would, but they worked. His new collection of scars did itch yet, though. Tuon. His wife. He was married. He had known it was coming, had known for a long time, but just the same. Married. He should have felt different somehow,
Definitely have to
but he still felt
keep
like
an eye
himself.
out for that.
He intended to keep it that way, burn him if he did not. If Tuon expected Matt Cawthon to settle down, to give up gambling or some such, she had another think coming. He supposed he would have to give
Oh,
over
shit,
chasing
25.
after women, much less catching them, but he would still enjoy dancing with them and looking at them, just not when he was with her. Burn him if he knew when that would be. He was not about to go anywhere she had the upper hand, her and her talk of cupbearers and running grooms and marrying to serve the Empire.
It's still.
How was marrying him
well, it's not
supposed to
cold
serve
enough
the
to where
flaming
I
Empire?
actually have my AC on in my room
Musenge
too.
left the other 10 men in 5-0 gear in red and black armor and trotted his black gelding up to Matt. The horse had good lines, built for speed and endurance both, as far as
Right.
Matt could tell without a
That's
thorough
every some good
examination.
weather there.
Musenge looked built for endurance, a stocky, stolid man, his face worn but hard, his eyes like polished stones. "Forgiveness, Highness," he drawled, banging a gauntleted fist against his breastplate. "But shouldn't the men be back to work?" He slurred his words worse than Selucia, almost to unintelligibility. "Their rest break has stretched a long time. I doubt they can complete the wall before the traitor arrives as it is." Matt had wondered how long it would take him to mention that. He had expected it earlier. Open-faced helmets off, but breastplates strapped on, the crossbowmen were sitting on the ground behind a long, curving wall, perhaps a third of a circle made of earth thrown up out of the 4-foot-deep trench fronting it, with a thicket of sharpened stakes driven into the ground in front of that, and extending a little beyond the ends of the trench. They had finished that in short order. Infantry needed to be as handy with shovel, mattock, and axe as they were with weapons. Even cavalry did, but making horsemen believe was harder. Footmen knew it was better to have something between you and the enemy, if you could. The tools lay scattered along the trench now. Some of the men were dicing, others just taking their ease, even napping. Soldiers slept any chance they got. A few were reading books, of all things. Reading. Mandevwen moved among them, fingering his eye patch, and now and then bending to say a few words to a bannerman. The only lancer present, standing beside his horse, every line of him saying he had nothing to do with the crossbowmen, held no lance, but rather a long banner staff, encased for half its length in leather. It was perfect terrain for what Matt had in mind. Nearly 2 miles of grassy meadow dotted with wildflowers, and a few low bushes stretched from the wall to the tall trees at the western end. To the north was a blackwater swamp, full of oaks and odd white-flowering trees that seemed half-thick roots, with a lake clinging to its western edge, and forest below the lake. A small river flowed south out of the swamp, half a mile behind Matt, before curving away to the west on his left. A
Yeah,
small
that's
river, but wide
definitely.
enough and deep enough that
I definitely
horses
had
would have to
to
swim.
heads up.
The far bank lay beyond bowshot. There was only
Yeah,
one way for
I
any
definitely
attacker
been
to get at the wall:
struggling on getting views.
come straight for it. When they arrive, I don't want them stopping to count how many men in red and black are here, he replied. Mesenge winced slightly for some reason. I want them to see an unfinished wall and tools thrown down because we learned they were close. The promise of 100,000 crowns gold has to have their blood up, but I want them too excited to think straight.
I'll
They'll see us
definitely be
vulnerable,
hitting
our
his up,
defenses incomplete,
Quantum.
and with any luck, they'll rush in straight away. They'll figure close to half of them will die when we lose, but that will just raise the chances for one of the others to get that gold. They'll only expect us to manage one volley. He slapped his hands together and hips shifted. Then the trap closes. Still, Highness, I wish we had more of your crossbowmen. I've heard you may have as many as 30,000. Mesenge had heard him tell Tuon he would fight the Shan too. The man was probing for information. I have fewer than I did, Matt said with a grimace. His victories had hardly been bloodless, only remarkably close to it. Near 400 crossbowmen lay in Altaran graves, and close to 500 of the cavalry. A small enough butcher's bill considering, yet he liked it best when the butcher presented no bill. But what I have is present for the day. As you say, Highness. Mesenge's voice was so neutral, he could have been commenting on the price of beans. Strange. He did not look like a diffident man. I have always been ready to die for her. There was no need for him to say which her he meant. I guess I am too, Mesenge. Like he thought he meant that. Yes, he did mean it. Did that mean he was in love? Better to live for her, though, wouldn't you say? Should you not be donning your armor, Highness? I don't intend getting close enough to the fighting to need armor. A general who draws his sword has put aside his baton and become a common soldier. He was only quoting Comadrin again. He seemed to do that a lot when discussing soldiering, but then the man had known just about everything there was to know about the craft. Just quoting, yet it appeared to impress the weathered man.
Yeah, you have a good night too.
And asked bloody permission before riding back to his men. Matt was tempted to ask what that Highness foolishness was about. Likely it was just some Seanchan way of calling him a lord. But he had not heard anything like it in Nebudar, and he had been surrounded by Seanchan there. 5 figures appeared out of the forest at the foot of the meadow, and he did not need a looking glass to know them. The 2 Ogier in armor, striped bright red and black, would have told him, even if Vannin's bulk had not. The mounted men were at a flat gallop, yet the Ogier kept pace, long arms swinging, axes swinging like a sawmill's drive shaft. "Slingmen, get ready!" Matt shouted. "Everybody else, go pick up a shovel!" The appearance had to be just right. As most of the crossbowmen scattered to pick up tools and make a show of working on the trench and wall, 50 others strapped on their helmets and lined up in front of a Ludra. Tall men, they still carried the short swords they called catgutters, but instead of crossbows, they were armed with 4-foot-long sling staffs. He would have liked more than 50, but Eludra only had so much of her powders. Each man wore a cloth belt sewn with pockets slung across his breastplate, and each pocket held a stubby leather cylinder larger than a man's fist with a short length of dark fuse sticking out of the end. Eludra had not come up with a fancy name for them yet. She would, though. She was one for fancy names. Dragons and dragon's eggs. One by one, the men held up long pieces of slow match for her to light with a striker. She did it quickly, using each striker until the long wooden stick had burned down nearly to her fingertips. But she never winced, just dropped the thing and lit another, while telling the sling men to be faster. She was getting low on strikers. Light, but she was tight with the things. She had 5 more boxes that Matt knew of. As each man turned away from her, he put the smoking slow match between his teeth and secured one of the cylinders to his sling staff as he walked to the wall. There were wide intervals between sling men. They had to cover the whole length of the wall. "Time to get your people in place, Messenj," Matt said loudly. The Death Watch guards formed a single line abreast, with the gardeners on the end. Anybody who took one glance through a looking glass would know what they were. All they needed was to see Ogier in armor and the sun glinting off all that red and black. And if they stopped to think how few of the guards there were, they would still see they had Matt outnumbered, and there would be only one way to find out whether Tuon was with him. Vannon galloped behind the wall, flung himself out of the saddle, and immediately began walking his lathered dun to cool the animal down. As soon as he passed the wall, crossbowmen began dropping the tools and running to put on helmets and pick up crossbows. Those had been laid so that the men formed 3 spaced ranks with gaps where the slingmen stood. It no longer mattered if anyone was watching from the forest. What they saw would seem natural. Matt trotted Pips to Vannon and dismounted. The 2 human Deathwatch guards and the 2 Ogier went to join the others. The horses' nostrils flared with their heavy breathing, but the Ogier were panting no harder. One was Hartha, a stone-eyed fellow who apparently ranked very close to Messenj. Vannon scowled at the men who had not gotten down to walk their horses. A horse thief he might be, reformed or not, but he disliked mistreating horseflesh. "They went up like one of our night flowers when they glimpsed us," he said, nodding toward Eludra. "We made sure they got a good look at that fancy armor, then hightailed it as soon as they started getting mounted. They're coming hard behind us, harder than they should." He spat on the ground. "I didn't get a good look at their animals, but I doubt they're all good for that run. Some'll founder before they get here." "The more the better," Matt said. "The fewer who make it, the better in my book. All he needed was to give Tuon a day or 2 head start on them. And if that came from their ruining horses, if they rode out of the trees and decided he had too many men to take on, he would take that over a battle any day. After today's 6-mile gallop, they would need to rest their horses a few days before they were fit to travel any distance at all." Vannon directed that scowl at him. "Others might go around calling him my lord and highness, but not Chell Vannon." Matt laughed and clapped him on the shoulder before swinging back into Pips's saddle. It was good there was someone who did not think he was a fool noble, or at least did not care whether or not he was. He rode to join the Aes Sedai, who were mounted now.
Yeah, cheers.
Blerick and Fenn, the one on a bay gelding, the other on a black, gave him stares almost as dark as those they had directed at Messenj. They still suspected he had something to do with what had happened to Jolene. He thought of telling Fenn that his stub of a top knot looked ridiculous. Fenn shifted in his saddle and stroked his sword hilt. Then again, maybe not. "What I told you," Jolene was telling Bethaman and Sita, shaking an admonitory finger. Her dark bay gelding looked a war horse, but was not. The animal had a good turn of speed, yet its temperament was mild as milk water. "If you even think about embracing Saidar, you'll regret it." Teslin grunted sourly. She patted her white-faced chestnut mare, a much more feisty creature than Jolene's mount, and spoke to the air. "She does train wild udders and expect them to behave once out of her sight. Or perhaps she does think the tower will accept age over novices." Spots of color appeared in Jolene's cheeks, but she straightened in her saddle without saying anything. As usual, when those 2 got into a conflict, Edesina concentrated on something else, in this case, brushing imaginary dust from her divided skirts. Enough tension to choke on. Suddenly riders poured out of the trees at the far end of the meadow in a torrent that swelled into a spreading lake of steel-tipped lances as they drew rein, no doubt in surprise at what lay before them. It seemed that not as many horses had foundered as Matt had hoped for. Pulling the looking-glass from its scabbard tied to his saddle's pommel, he raised it to his eye. The Taraboners were easy to pick out, with male veils hiding their faces to the eyes, but the others wore every sort of helmet, rounded or conical, with face bars and without. He even saw a few ridged Tyran helmets, though that did not mean there were Tyrans among them. Most men used whatever armor they could find. "Don't think," he thought. "The woman is here. That 100,000 gold crowns is waiting. Don't bloody..." A shrill Shonchen bugle sounded, thin with the distance, and the horsemen began advancing at a walk, already spreading out to extend beyond the wall's edges. "Uncase the banner, McCall," Matt ordered. So these flaming sons of goats thought they were coming to murder Tuon, did they? This time we'll let 'em know who's killing them. Mandewin, you have the command. Mandewin turned his bay to face front. "Stand ready," he shouted, and under-officers and bannermen echoed the cry. McCall pulled the leather case off, carefully fastening it to his saddle, and the banner streamed on the wind, a red-fringed white square with a large, open red hand in the center, and beneath it, embroidered in red, the words, "Toiviandi se tovia sagain." It's time to toss the dice, Matt thought, translating. And so it was. He saw Musenge eyeing it. He seemed very calm for a man with 10,000 lances coming toward him. "Are you ready, Aludra?" Matt called. "Of course I am ready," she replied. "I only wish I had my dragons." Musenge shifted his attention to her. Burn her, she needed to watch her tongue. Matt wanted those dragons to be a shock when the Shonchen first faced them. Perhaps 1,200 paces from the wall, the ranks of lancers began to trot, and at 600 they began to gallop, but not as hard as they might have. Those horses were tired after a long run already. They lumbered. None of the lances had come down yet. They would not until the last 100 paces. Some of those carried streamers that floated behind them in the air. A large knot of red here, a clump of green or blue there. They might have been house colors, or perhaps they marked mercenary companies. All those hooves made a sound like distant thunder rolling. "Aludra!" Matt shouted without looking back. A hollow thump and an acrid sulfur smell announced the lofting tube sending its night flower aloft, and a loud pop, the blooming of a ball of red streaks overhead. Some of the galloping horsemen pointed to it as if in amazement. None looked behind them to see Talmanas leading the 3 banners of horse out of the forest below the lake. Their lances had been left with the pack animals, but every man would have his horse bow out. Spreading out in a single line, they began following the galloping riders, increasing speed as they came. Their horses had been ridden far last night, but not pressed too hard, and they had been rested all morning. The distance between the two groups of riders began to narrow. "Front rank!" Mandewin shouted when the horsemen were 400 paces away. "Loose!" Above 1,000 bolts flashed out, dark streaks in the air. Immediately, the front rank bent to fasten their cranks to their crossbows, and the second rank raised their weapons. "Second rank!" Mandewin shouted. "Loose!" Another 1,000 quarrels streaked for the oncoming horsemen. At that range, they could not punch through a breastplate despite heads designed to do just that. But men with shattered legs toppled from their saddles, and men with ruined arms reined in frantically to try stemming the flow of blood. And the horses. Light, the poor horses. Horses fell by the hundreds, some kicking and screaming, struggling to stand, others not moving at all, many of them tripping more animals. Catapulted riders tumbled across the meadow grass until they were trampled by the riders behind. "Third rank! Loose!" Mandewin shouted, and as soon as those bolts were away, the front rank straightened. "Front rank!" Mandewin called. "Loose!" And another 1,000 bolts added to the carnage. "Second rank! Loose!" It was not so one-sided as an ambush, of course. Some of the galloping horsemen had flung down their lances and uncased their horsebows. Arrows began to fall among the crossbowmen. Shooting accurately from a galloping horse was no easy task, and the range was too far at the start for the arrows to kill. But more than one man struggled to work his crossbow with a shaft jutting from his arm. The wall protected their legs yet. Too far to kill, unless your target's luck had run out. Matt saw a man fall with an arrow in his eye, another with a shaft taken in the throat. There were other gaps in the ranks as well. Men shuffled forward quickly to refill them. "You could join in any time, Jolene," he said. "Third rank! Loose!" The Aes Sedai shook her head irritably. "I must be in danger. I don't feel in danger yet." Tesla nodded. She was watching the charge as if it were a parade, and not a very interesting one at that. If you would allow Sita and me, Bethaman began, but Jolene looked over her shoulder coldly, and the Shawnchen woman subsided and dropped her eyes to her hands on the reins. Sita smiled nervously, but it slid off her face under Jolene's stare. Front rank! Lose! Matt rolled his eyes to the heavens and muttered a prayer that was half curse. The bloody women did not feel in danger. He felt as though his bloody head was on the chopping block. Second rank! Lose! Talmanas had come in range now, and announced himself with a volley from the 4,000 bows at 300 paces that cleared saddles. Closing the distance, they fired again. Again. The enemy ranks seemed to ripple with the shock. Some men whirled about and charged at Talmanas' line, with lances coming down. Others began returning his hail of arrows with their own. Most continued on, though. Form square! Mandeville shouted, a heartbeat before Matt could. He hoped the men had not left it too bloody late. The band was well trained, though. The men on the flanks fell back at the run, as calmly as if arrows were not pelting them, clanging off breastplates and helmets. And sometimes not. Men fell. The three ranks never lost cohesion, though, as they bent into a hollow box with Matt at its center. Mesenge and the other human death guards had their swords out, and the Ogier were hefting their long axes. Slingman! Mandeville shouted. Loose at will! Front rank! West! Loose! Slingmen along the western rank shifted their sling staffs so they could touch the fuses coming from the stubby cylinders to the slow matches held in their teeth, and, as the volley lanced out from the crossbows, whipped their slings back and then forward. The dark cylinders flew more than 100 paces to land among the onrushing horsemen. The slingmen were already fitting more of the cylinders to their slings before the first fell. Aludra had marked each fuse with pieces of thread to indicate different burning times, and each cylinder erupted with a roar and a burst of flame, some on the ground, some as high as a mounted man's head. The explosion was not the real weapon, though a man struck in the face was suddenly headless. He stayed upright in the saddle for 3 strides before toppling. No, Aludra had wrapped a layer of hard pebbles around the powder inside each cylinder, and those pierced flesh deeply when they hit. Shrieking horses fell to thrash on the ground. Riders fell to lie still. An arrow tugged at Matt's left sleeve. Another pierced his right sleeve, only the fletchings keeping it from getting through cleanly, and a third ripped open the right shoulder of his coat. He put a finger behind the scarf around his neck and tugged. The bloody thing felt awfully tight of a sudden. Maybe he should consider wearing armor at times like this. The enemy flanks were beginning to curl in now, preparing to envelop the crossbowmen behind the wall. Talmanas' men still peppered their rear with arrows, but several hundred men had been forced to drop their bows to defend themselves with swords, and it was unlikely that all of the horses with empty saddles out there belonged to Tarabanners or Amadisians. He had left a gap in the center of his line, a path for anyone who decided to flee, yet no one was taking the offering. They could smell that 100,000 crowns gold. I think, Jolene said slowly, yes, I feel in danger now. Teslin simply drew back her hand and threw a spear of fire larger than a horse's head. The explosion hurled dirt and pieces of men and horses into the air. It was about bloody time. Facing in 3 directions, the Aes Sedai began hurling fireballs as fast as they could swing their arms, but the devastation they wrought did nothing to slow the attack. Those men should have been able to see there was no woman matching Tuon's description inside the square by this time, but their blood was no doubt on fire, the scent of riches in their nostrils. A man could live the rest of his life like a noble with 100,000 crowns gold. The square was encircled, and they fought to close on it. Fought and died as volleys from the crossbows lashed them and slingmen killed them. Another wall began to rise, made of dead and dying men and horses, a wall that some tried to ride over and joined in the attempt. More scrambled down from their saddles and tried to clamber over. Crossbow bolts hurled them back. This close, bolts penetrated breastplates like hot knives going into butter. On they came and died. The silence seemed to come suddenly. Not quite silence. The air was full of the sound of panting men who had been working those cranks as fast as they could. And there was moaning from the wounded. A horse was still shrieking somewhere. Matt could see no one on his feet between the wall of dead and Talmanas. No one in the saddle except men in green helmets and breastplates. men who had lowered their bows and swords. The Aes Sedai folded their hands on the high pommels of their saddles.
Cheers.
They were breathing hard too. "It's done, Matt," came Talmanis' shout. "Those who are not dead are dying. Not one of the fools tried to escape." Matt shook his head. He had expected them to be half mad with the lust for gold. They had been completely mad with it. It would be necessary to haul away dead men and horses for Matt and the others to get out, and Talmanis set men to work, fastening ropes to horses to drag them aside. No one wanted to climb over that. No one but the Ogier. "I want to see if I can find the traitor," Arthur said, and he and the other 6 gardeners shouldered their axes and walked over the mound of bodies as if it were dirt. "Well, at least we settled this," Jolene said, patting her face with a lace-edged handkerchief. Sweat dotted her forehead. "You owe a debt, Matt. Aes Sedai do not become involved in private wars as a rule. I shall have to think on how you can pay it." Matt had a pretty good idea what she would come up with. She was mad herself if she thought he would agree. "Crossbows settled this, Marath Tamani," Musenge said. His helmet, breastplate, and coat were off, his left shirt sleeve ripped away so one of the other guards could wrap a bandage around where an arrow had gone through. The sleeve had come away very neatly, as if the stitching had been weak. He had a raven tattooed on his shoulder. "Crossbows and men with heart. You never had more than this, did you, Highness?" That was not a question. "This and whatever losses you suffered." "I told you," Matt said. "I had enough." He was not going to reveal anything more to the man than he could not avoid, but Musenge nodded as if he had confirmed everything. By the time an opening could be cleared so that Matt and the others could ride through, Arthur and the gardeners had returned. "I found the traitor," Arthur said, holding up the severed head by its hair. Musenge's eyebrows climbed at the sight of that dark, hook-nosed face. "She will be very interested to see this," he said softly. Softly as the sound of sword being drawn is soft. "We must carry it to her." "You know him?" Matt asked. "We know him, Highness." Musenge's face, suddenly seeming carved from stone, said he would say no more on the subject. "Look, would you stop calling me that? My name is Matt. After today, I'd say you have a right to use it." Matt surprised himself by sticking out his hand. That stone mask crumpled in astonishment. "I could not do that, Highness," he said in scandalized tones. "When she married you, you became Prince of the Ravens. To speak your name would lower my eyes forever." Matt took off his hat and scrubbed fingers through his hair. He had told everyone who would listen that he did not like nobles, did not want to be one, and he had meant it. He still meant it. And now he bloody was one. He did the only thing he could. He laughed until his sides ached.
Epilogue. Remember the old saying. The red-walled room, its ceiling painted fancifully with birds and fish cavorting among clouds and waves, bustled with brown-clad clerks scurrying along the aisles between the long tables that covered the floor. None seemed to be trying to listen. Most seemed stunned with cause, but Suroth disliked their presence. They had to overhear some of what was being said, and it was potentially dire news. Galgan had insisted, though. They needed to work to keep their minds off the disastrous news from home, and they were all trusted men and women. He insisted. At least the white-haired old man was not dressed as a soldier this morning. His voluminous blue trousers and short, high-collared red coat with rows of gold buttons embossed with his sigil were the height of Shandar fashion, which meant the height of fashion for the Empire. When he wore armor, or even just his red uniform, he sometimes looked at her as if she were a soldier under his command. Well, once Elbar brought word that Tuon was dead, she could have Galgan killed. His cheeks were smeared with ashes, as were hers. The ship Semirag had promised had brought word of the Empress's death and the Empire racked by rebellion in every quarter. There was no Empress, no daughter of the Nine Moons.
I'll be right
To
back.
commoners, the world trembled on the brink of destruction. To some of the blood, too. With Galgan and a few more dead, there would be none to object to Suroth Sabel Meldareth proclaiming herself Empress. She tried not to think of the new name she would take. Thinking on a new name beforehand was bad luck. A frown creasing his face, Galgan looked down at the map spread out before them and placed a red-lacquered fingernail atop mountains on the southern coast of Arad Doman. She did not know what the mountains were called. The map showed all of Arad Doman and held 3 markers, 1 red wedge and 2 white circles, spaced out in a long line north to south. Has Turan gotten an accurate count of how many men came out of these mountains to join Ituralda when he crossed into Arad Doman, Yamada? Ephraim Yamada wore the ashes too, since he was of the blood, if only the low blood, his hair cut in the bowl and tail rather than a narrow crest across an otherwise shaved scalp. Only the commoners around the table, whatever their rank, were without. Graying and tall in a blue and gold breastplate with broad shoulders and lean hips, Yamada still held some of the beauty of his youth. He reports at least 100,000, Captain General. Perhaps half again that. And how many came out after Turan crossed the border? Possibly 200,000, Captain General. Galgan sighed and straightened. So Turan has 1 army ahead of him and another behind. Very likely the whole of Arad Doman's strength, and between them he is outnumbered. The fool, stating the blindingly obvious. Turan should have stripped Tarabon of every sword and lance, Suroth snapped. If he survives this debacle, I will have his head. Galgan quirked a white eyebrow at her. I hardly think Tarabon is loyal enough to support that just yet, he said dryly. Besides, he has Damani and Rakan. They should offset his lesser numbers. Speaking of Damani and Rakan, I've signed the orders raising Tylee Kirgon to Lieutenant General and the low blood since you dithered over it, and orders to return most of those Rakan to Amadisia and Altara. Tryson still hasn't found whoever created that little mess in the north, and I don't like the notion that whoever it was is lying in wait to spring out as soon as Tryson returns to the Mulvane Gap. Suroth hissed, gripping her pleated blue skirts in her fists before she could stop her hands. She would not let the man make her show emotion. You overstep yourself, Galgan, she said coldly. I command the Forerunners. For the time being, I command the return. You will sign no orders without my approval. You commanded the Forerunners who have been subsumed into the return, he replied calmly, and Suroth tasted bitterness. The news from the Empire had emboldened him. With the Empress dead, Galgan intended to make himself the first emperor in 900 years. It seemed he would have to die by tonight. As for you commanding the return, he cut off at the sound of heavy boots from the corridor. Suddenly, Deathwatch guards filled the doorway, armored and hands on their sword hilts. Hard eyes stared out of their red and green helmets to survey the room. Only when they were satisfied did they step aside to reveal that the corridor was filled with Deathwatch guards, human and Ogier. Suroth barely noticed them. She had eyes only for the small, dark woman in pleated blue with a shaven head and ashes on her cheeks. The news was all over the city. She could not have reached the palace without hearing of her mother's death, her family's deaths, but her face was a stern mask. Suroth's knees hit the floor automatically. Around her, the blood knelt. The commoners prostrated themselves. The light's blessings for your safe return, Highness, she said in chorus with the rest of the blood. So Elbar had failed. No matter. Tuan would not take a new name or become empress until the mourning was finished. She could still die, clearing the way for a new empress. Show them what Captain Messenge brought me, Banner General Kharid, Tuan said. A tall man with 3 dark plumes on his helmet bent to carefully empty a large lump from a canvas bag onto the green floor tiles. The gagging smell of decay began to permeate the room. Dropping the bag, he strode across the floor to stand beside Suroth. It took her a moment to recognize Elbar's hook-nosed face in that rotting mass, but as soon as she did, she fell forward, prostrating herself, kissing the floor tiles. Not in desperation, though. She could recover from this, unless they had put Elbar to the question. My eyes are lowered, Highness. That one of mine has offended you so deeply that you took his head. Offended me? Tuan seemed to be weighing the words. It might be said he offended me. He tried to kill me. Gasps filled the room, and before Suroth could more than open her mouth, the Death Watch Guard Banner General planted a boot on her bottom, seized her crest in his fist, and hauled her upper body clear of the floor. She did not struggle. That would only have added to the indignity. My eyes are deeply lowered that one of mine should be a traitor, Highness, she said hoarsely. She wished she could have spoken naturally, but the cursed man had her back arched till it was a wonder she could speak at all. Had I even suspected, I would have had him put to the question myself. But if he tried to implicate me, Highness, he lied to protect his true master. I have some thoughts on that, which I would share with you in private, if I may be allowed. With a little luck, she could lay this to Gulgon. His usurpation of her authority would help. Tuan looked over Suroth's head. She met Galgon's eyes, and Abildar's, and Yamada's, and those of every one of the blood, but not Suroth's. It is well known that Zyrad Elbar was Suroth's man completely. He did nothing that she did not order. Therefore Suroth Sabel Mel Darath is no more. This Darko Vale will serve the Death Watch Guard as they wish, until her hair has grown enough for her to be decent when she is sent to the block for sale. Suroth never thought of the knife she had intended to use to open her veins, a knife beyond reach in her apartments. She could not think at all. She started screaming, a wordless howl, before they even began cutting her clothing off. The Andorran sun was warm after Tarvalon. Pavara removed her cloak and began tying it behind her saddle as the gateway winked shut, hiding the view of the Ogier Grove in Tarvalon. None of them had wanted anyone to see them leaving. They would return to the grove for the same reason, unless matters went very badly wrong, in which case they might never return. She had thought this task must be carried out by someone who combined the highest diplomatic skills with the courage of a lion. Well, she was no coward, at least. She could say that much of herself. Where did you learn the weave for bonding a warder? Javindra asked abruptly, stowing her own cloak in similar fashion. You should recall that I once suggested Red Sisters would be well served by having warders. Pavara smoked her red riding gloves, showing no concern for the question. She had expected it before this. Why would you be surprised I know the weave? In truth, she had needed to ask Yukiri, and had been hard-pressed to dissemble her reason for asking. She doubted that Yukiri was suspicious, though. A red bonding a warder was as likely as a woman flying. Except, of course, that was why she had come to Andor. Why they had all come. Javindra was there only at Sutama's command, given when Pavara and Tarna could not come up with enough names to suit the highest. The angular sitter did not bother to hide her displeasure over that, not from Pavara, although she had buried it deeply around Sutama. Tarna was there, of course, pale-haired and icy cold, her keeper's stole left behind, but her divided gray skirts embroidered in red to the knee. For Elida's keeper to have a warder would be difficult, though the men were to be housed in the city, away from the tower. Yet it had all been her idea in the first place, and she was, if not eager, then determined to take part in this first experiment. Besides, the need for numbers was paramount, because they had found only 3 other sisters willing to entertain the idea. The primary task of the Red for so long, finding men who could channel and bringing them to the tower to be gentled, tended to sour women on all men. So the clues had been few and far between. Jezreel was a square-faced tyrant who kept a painted miniature of the boy she had almost married instead of coming to the tower. His grandchildren would be grandparents now, but she still spoke of him fondly. Desala, a beautiful Kyrianan with large dark eyes and an unfortunate temper, when given the chance, would dance any number of men to exhaustion in a night. And Melaire, plump and witty with a love of conversation, sent money to Andor to pay for her grandnephew's education, as she had for her nephews and nieces. Weary of searching out such tiny clues, weary of probing delicately to learn whether they meant what they might, Favara had convinced Sutama that 6 would be enough to begin. 2, a larger party, might cause some unfortunate reaction. After all, the whole Red Aja appearing at this so-called Black Tower, or even half, might well make the men think themselves under attack. There was no telling how sane they all still were. That was one thing they had agreed on behind Sutama's back. They would bond no men who showed any signs of madness. That was, if they were allowed to bond any. Aja Eyes and Ears in Camelin had sent copious reports on the Black Tower, and some had even found employment inside it, so they had no difficulty locating the well-worn dirt track that led down from the city to a grandiose double-arched black gate, near 50 feet tall and 10 spans wide, topped by crenellations over a down-pointing central spike of stone and flanked by a pair of thick crenellated black towers that stood at least 15 spans high. There were no actual gates to close up the opening, and the black stone wall that stretched out of sight east and west, marked at intervals by the foundations of bastions and towers, was nowhere higher than 4 or 5 paces that she could see. Weeds grew along the uneven top, and grasses ruffled by the breeze. Those unfinished walls, looking as if they might never be finished, made the gate seem ludicrous. The 3 men who stepped out into the opening were not at all ludicrous, however. They wore long black coats and swords at their hips. One, a lean young fellow with curled mustaches, had a silver pin in the shape of a sword on his high collar, one of the dedicated. Favara resisted the instinct to think of him as equivalent to an accepted, and the other 2 as novices. Novices and accepted were kept safe and guided until they knew enough of the power to become Aes Sedai. By all reports, soldiers and dedicated were considered ready for battle almost as soon as they learned to channel, and they were forced from the first day, pressed to seize as much of Saidin as they could, made to use it almost continually. Men died from that, and they called it training losses, as if they could hide death behind bland words. The thought of losing novices or accepted in that fashion curdled Pavara's stomach, but it seemed that the men took it in stride. "A fine morning to you, Aes Sedai," the dedicated said with a small bow as they reined in before him. A very small bow, never taking his eyes from them. His accents were those of Murundi. "Now what would 6 sisters be wanting here at the Black Tower this fine morning?" "To see the Mahale," Pavara replied, managing to avoid choking on the word. It meant leader in the old tongue, but the implication of taking that alone as a title gave the word much stronger meaning, as if he led everyone and everything. "Ah, to see the Mahale, is it? And of what Ajas should I say?" "The red," Pavara replied, and watched him blink. Very satisfying, but not very helpful. "The red," he said flatly. He had not remained startled very long. "Well then, and Kazan, Alcine, you keep watch while I see what the Mahale has to say to this." He turned his back, and the vertical silvery slash of a gateway appeared in front of him, widening into an opening no larger than a door. Was that as large as he could make? There had been some discussion about whether to bond men who were as strong as possible, or those who were weak. The weak might be more easily controlled, while the strong would definitely be more useful. They had reached no consensus. Each sister would have to decide for herself. He darted through the gateway and closed it before she had a chance to see more than a white stone platform with steps leading up one side, and a squared-off black stone that might have been one of the building blocks for the wall, polished till it shone in the sun, sitting atop it. The 2 who remained stayed in the middle of the double arch as if to bar the sisters from riding in. One was a Saldaean, a skinny, broad-nosed man just short of his middle years, who had something of the look of a clerk about him, a bit of a stoop as from hunching for long hours over a writing table. The other a boy, little more than a child, who raked dark hair out of his eyes with his fingers, though the breeze quickly put it back again. Neither seemed the slightest uneasy over confronting 6 sisters alone. If they were alone, were there others in those towers? Pevara refrained from glancing at the tower tops. "You there, boy," Dasala said in a voice like chimes tinged with anger. The surest way to set off her temper was to harm a child. "You should be at home with your mother studying your letters. What are you doing here?" The boy flushed bright red and raked hair from his face again. "Samuel's all right, Aes Sedai," the Saldean said, patting the boy's shoulder. "He's a quick learner, and you don't need to show him anything twice before he knows it." The boy stood up very straight, pride on his face, and tucked his thumbs behind his sword belt. A sword! At his age! True, a noble's son would have been learning the sword for several years at Samuel Alceen's age, but he would not be allowed to wear the thing about. "Pevara," Tarna said coolly. "No children. I knew they had children here, but no children." "Light!" Melaire breathed. Her white mare sensed her agitation and tossed her head. "Certainly no children." "That would be an abomination," Jezreel said. "No children," Pevara agreed quickly. "I think we should wait to say more until we see Master the Mahale," Javindra sniffed. "No children. What?" Aes Sedai and Kazin asked, frowning. "No children what?" he said, when no one answered. He no longer appeared so much like a clerk. The stoop remained, but something in his tilted eyes suddenly seemed dangerous. Was he holding the male half of the power? The possibility sent a chill down Pavara's spine, but she resisted the desire to embrace Saidar. Some men who could channel seemed able to sense when a woman was holding the power, and Kazin looked like he might be hasty now. They waited in silence except for the occasional stamp of a hoof, Pavara schooling herself to patience, Javindra grumbling under her breath. Pavara could not make out the words, but she knew grumbling when she heard it. Tarna and Jezreel took books from their saddlebags and read. Good. Let these Ashamans see that they were unconcerned. Only, not even the boy seemed impressed. He and the Saldean just stood there in the middle of the gate, watching, hardly blinking. After perhaps half an hour, a larger gateway opened, and the Murandians strode through. "The Mahale will be receiving you at the palace, Aes Sedai. Go on through." He jerked his head toward the opening. "You will show us the way," Pavara said, dismounting. The gateway was larger, but she would have had to crouch to ride through. "There'll be someone on the other side to guide you." He barked a laugh. "The Mahale doesn't associate with the likes of me." Pavara filed that away, to chew over later. As soon as the last of them was through, near the white stone platform with its mirror-bright black stone, the gateway winked shut. But they were not alone. 4 men and 2 women in rough woolens took the reins of their horses, and a dark, heavy-set man with both the silver sword and a sinuous red and gold figure, a dragon on his tall black collar, gave them a minimal bow. "Follow me," he said curtly in a Tyran accent. His eyes were like augers. The palace the Mirandian had spoken of was just that. 2 stories of white marble, topped with pointed domes and spires in the style of Saldeia, separated from a large space of bare, hard-packed ground by the white platform. It was not large among palaces, but most nobles lived in buildings far smaller and less grand. Broad stone stairs rose to a wide landing in front of tall, twinned doors. Each bore a gauntleted fist, gripping 3 lightning bolts, carved large and gilded. Those doors swung open before the Tyran reached them, but there were no servants in evidence. The man must have channeled. Pavara felt that chill again. Javindra muttered under her breath, with a sound of prayer this time. The palace might have belonged to any noble with a taste for tapestries showing battles and red and black floor tiles, except that there were no servants in evidence. He had servants, though unfortunately no red Aja eyes and ears among them, but did he expect them to remain out of sight when not needed? or had he ordered them from the halls? Perhaps to avoid having anyone see Six Eyes Sedai arrive. That line of reasoning ran towards thoughts she would rather not consider. She had acknowledged the dangers before leaving the White Tower. There was no point dwelling on them. The chamber the Tyrant led them to was a throne room, where a ring of spiral-cut black columns supported what must have been the palace's largest dome, its interior layered with gilt, and half filled with gilded lamps hanging on gilded chains. Tall, mirrored stand lamps stood along the curved walls, too. Perhaps 100 men in black coats were standing to either side of the room. Every man she could see wore the sword and the dragon. Men with hard faces, leering faces, cruel faces. Their eyes focused on her and the other sisters. The Tyrant did not announce them, but rather simply joined the mass of Ashaman and left them to make their own way across the room. The floor tiles were red and black here, too. Taim must particularly like those colors. The man himself was lounging on what could only be called a throne, a massive chair as heavily carved and gilded as any throne she had seen, atop a white marble dais. Kavara focused on him, and not only to avoid feeling all those eyes of men who could channel following her. Mazrim Taim drew the eye. He was tall, with a strongly hooked nose and an air of physical strength about him, an air of darkness, too. He sat there with his ankles crossed and one arm hanging over the heavy arm of the throne, yet he seemed ready to explode into violence. Interestingly, though his black coat was embroidered with blue and gold dragons that twined around the sleeves from elbows to cuffs, he did not wear the collar pins. 6 sisters of the Red Aja, he said when they stopped short of the dais. His eyes. She had only thought the Tyrant's eyes were augurs. Plainly you didn't come to try gentling us all. Chuckles rippled around the room. Why did you come asking to speak to me? I am Pt.17, sitter for the Red, she said. This is Javindra Doraila, also a Red sitter. The others are Tarnar Fair, the Salanavanshi. I didn't ask your names, Taim cut in coldly. I asked why you came here. This was not going well. She managed not to take a deep breath, but she wanted to. Outwardly, she was cool and calm. Inside, she wondered whether she would end the day forcibly bonded or dead. We want to discuss bonding Ashaman as warders. After all, you've bonded 51 sisters against their will. As well to let him know they were aware of that from the start. We do not propose bonding any man against his will, however. A tall, golden-haired man standing near the dais sneered at her. Why should we allow Eyes Sedai to take any... Something unseen struck the side of his head so hard that his feet left the floor tiles before he fell in a heap, eyes closed, and blood trickling from his nostrils. A lean man with receding gray-streaked hair and a forked beard bent to touch a finger to the fallen man's head. He's alive, he said as he straightened, but his skull's cracked and his jaw's broken. He might have been talking about the weather. None of the men made any move to offer healing. Not one. I have some small skill in healing, Melaire said, gathering her skirts and already moving toward the fallen man. Enough for this, I think, with your permission. Taim shook his head. You do not have my permission. If Mishraila survives till nightfall, he'll be healed. Perhaps the pain will teach him to guard his tongue. You say you want to bond warders? Reds? That last word carried a great deal of contempt, which Pavara chose to ignore. Tarna's eyes could have turned the sun to an icicle, though. Pavara laid a cautionary hand on the other woman's arm as she spoke. Reds have experience with men who can channel. Mutters rose among the watching Ashaman, angry mutters. She ignored that, too. We are not afraid of them. Custom can be as hard to change as law, harder at times, but it has been decided to change ours. Henceforth, Red Sisters may bond warders, but only men who can channel. Each sister may bond as many as she feels comfortable with. Given the green, for example, I think that is unlikely to be more than 3 or 4. Very well. Havara blinked in spite of herself. Very well? She must have misunderstood him. He could not have been convinced so easily. Taim's eyes seemed to bore into her head. He spread his hands, and it was a mocking gesture. What would you have me say? Fair is fair. Equal shares. Accept very well and ask who will let you bond them. Besides, you must remember the old saying, let the Lord of Chaos rule. The chamber erupted with men's laughter. Havara had never heard any saying like that. The laughter made the hair on the back of her neck try to stand.
50-50.
The end of the 11th book of The Wheel of Time.
Hi, this is Laura Wilson of Audio Renaissance, and I'm speaking with Robert Jordan. How did you decide to start writing the Wheel of Time series?
I began writing The Wheel of Time because a great many notions had been bouncing around inside my head, and they started to coalesce. I wondered what it was really like to be tapped on the shoulder and told, you were born to be the savior of mankind. I didn't think it would be very much the way it is in so many books where someone pops up and says, hi, I was born to be the savior of mankind, and here's the prophecy, and everybody says, oh, well, let's go then. I thought self-interest would play a big part. And I was also wondering about the source of legends and myths. They can't all be anthropomorphizations of natural events. Some of them have to be distortions of things that actually happen, distortions by being passed down over generations. And that led into the distortion of information over distance, whether that's temporal distance or spatial distance. The further you are in time or space from the actual event, the less likely you are to know what really happened. And then finally, there was the thought about something that happens in Tolkien and a lot of other places. The wise old wizard shows up in a country village and says, you must follow me to save the world. And the villagers say, right then, go, off we go. Well, I did a lot of growing up in the country, and I've always thought that what those country folk would say, oh, is that so? Look here, have another beer. Have 2 on me. I'll be right back. I will, really. And then slip out the back door. There were a lot of things that came together, and even once I started, of course, a lot of things built in and added in and changed.
What about this notion of time as a wheel? Is that your idea?
No, it's not mine. It is from Hindu mythology that time is a wheel. But actually, most Eastern cultures believed that time was circular. The Greeks gave us the great gift of believing that time was linear. And that's a great gift because if time is circular, if everything repeats in cycles, then change is impossible. No matter what you do, it's always going to come back to what is here. But if time is linear, then change is possible. But I wanted the circularity because I wanted, again, to go into the changes by distance. So the myths and legends and a few of the stories that these people tell, well, some of them are based on our own current events, on the present. What they are doing is based on our myths and legends. So they are the source of our myths and legends, and we are the source of theirs.
So what religions or mythological traditions are your stories based on?
Different religions, different mythologies. I felt that because America is a melting pot, I had at least some right to mine the mythologies of any nation that is represented in the United States, and also religion. So there are elements that come out of religious books, and there are elements that come out of mythologies as well. Not done in a mythological way. I try to present these things so that you feel you are in a place that is quite real, and this could actually happen.
Tell me a bit about the idea of the one power.
In these books, there is the one power, which comes from the true source. And the one power is what turns the wheel of time, the power that drives the universe. And the conceit is the one power actually consists of two quite separate halves that work with each other and against one another to produce the driving force of the universe. Men can tap into one side, women can tap into the other. A man can't teach a woman how to use the male half or how to use the female half for that matter, and she can't teach him.
Are you an audiobooks listener? And if so, what sorts of books do you listen to?
I'm afraid the audiobooks I listen to are my own. I don't read my own books, but when I get the new audio tape, I listen to it because I get a different view. It is different than reading it.
So are you listening for a different interpretation of your work?
It's not so much the different interpretation. I want to have that one remove to see that I actually said what I think I said. You see, that's a problem that is very difficult for any writer. It's a problem that your editor helps you solve. You know what you intended to say. You know what you meant. And the fact that you perhaps didn't put it down clearly enough for someone who doesn't know what you meant to understand, that can be a problem. My wife, Harriet, is my editor, and she's very, very good at being able to say, you didn't convince me here, or I don't understand what you mean here. You have to do better. Because that's the point where I know what I meant, and because I know what I meant, it read fine to me. But to someone who didn't know what I meant, it didn't read fine. Well, I can also spot some of that in listening to the audio. And because I can spot it in listening to the audio, I know that, I thought I had put a bit of foreshadowing for something of the future here, and it doesn't come across clearly. I must do something about that in the next book to make sure that I do have that foreshadowing.
Well, thank you very much for talking with me. We hope you've enjoyed Knife of Dreams, an Audio Renaissance audiobook from Tor Books. Text copyright 2005 by the Bandersnatch Group.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into his life for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by. Everyone keep stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. And tomorrow will be the start of a new book, or a fresh book, should I say. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.